The cloaked man strode ahead, and with every step the corpses he'd already claimed started crowding around him. The other man, sprawled on the ground, stared in terror and blurted, "Who are you and why are you doing this?" The cloaked man let out a smug chuckle, then kept repeating the question, "Who are you?" as if it amused him. He shot back that he was evil, just like them, and then he crushed the air with his black hole power as black hands burst up from the ground and hauled the corpses straight back underground. Present time, in a mansion packed with luxury, a wealthy family's room sat still, until one person slowly blinked awake and stared straight up at the ceiling. An antique telephone and a dusty lamp sat on the nightstand, then the bedroom door cracked open a little. By the baby's crib, the woman welcomed the returning gentleman and introduced him to his son, and as she smiled, he strode up to the crib. The man stared at the ground and said with relief in his voice that he'd finally done it, he'd finally met him. He cradled the baby in his arms, muttering that even for a baby that kind of magical power was simply too much, and that scary guy was the real danger. No one doubted his future as a leader, and the House of Ark's magic clearly clicked with him too, because from this moment on, his life was about to be more than just joy. He chose the name Absolute for the kid and pressed his finger to his ear, telling him to listen, live by his honor, and forge his own path. Later on, our hero was dueling that night with twin swords, and the sidelines erupted with cheers for Lord Absolute as he yelled at the knight, demanding he fight the battle again. Meet Ark Absolute, the so-called hero with a wild twist. He's a reincarnated being. 10 years ago, he cracked his eyes open and stared at a ceiling he'd never seen, then a man's voice called out a name, and total confusion exploded in his head. Somehow, this world turned out to be exactly like the one from the novel The History of the State of Renan *, the very book he'd once read and loved more than anything. And then it hit him. He wasn't just watching, he was the power broker behind the curtain, running an underground crew with roots in Rainon and Duke Ark Absolute, the same group that had been wrecking countless lives across the country. And yet the biggest problem is how the story's ending lands. Ark Absolute, yeah, the one Alt got reborn into, gets wiped out by the story's main hero, Alt, and the reason he falls is brutal: he had zero allies. He could command the kingdom's underground syndicate, but once the aristocracy pulled the strings, they betrayed him and threw their support to the hero's side, and the more things spiraled, the more he drifted away from everyone else. During the hero's fight with him, he's left standing totally alone, doomed to get crushed by someone whose power dwarfs everything. And if the story keeps rolling like this, he's going to die. That's the one truth he refuses to say out loud. He had two choices: team up and play nice with the protagonist, or go full villain and take him down. He picked option 2 instantly, even while he secretly enjoyed the protagonist's romance and hated every second of it. He looked at the world and said, "I was born to be the villain," so he'd become one, just like the original story, only this time he'd never lose. Before the big events kick off, he'll slice away everything that sparks anxiety and go into it fully locked in and ready. He burst forward and smashed into his opponent, sparring like he meant it. He looked straight at the protagonist and vowed to erase him, because in his mind he was the ultimate villain. The moment he hit, every knight gasped, mouths falling open in pure shock. The blade's tip flashed at his opponent's throat, and with his hands fully up, he admitted defeat before Ark. The hero figured his plan would kick off by gathering loyal allies. Then knights rushed in, swearing the Lord Absolute had already decided victory was guaranteed. The hero shot them a cold, stern look and said it was crystal clear, and the knights instantly shook with fear. He muttered through his teeth, silently cursing, because this absolute evil skill has been brutal for him, and it only gets worse. It keeps growing, and the more people hate you, the stronger you become. But this skill lets the hero level up fast. Then he hurried to the knights, admitting he'd gotten a bit carried away, and the knights told him he didn't need to apologize at all. One of them said he looked at Mr. Absolute with total awe and respect, and the second one snapped, "Yep, exactly." That night, the hero who just fought stepped in, strode up to them, and barked at Lord Absolute that his fencing was deadly again. Because that last thrust hit perfectly, and the hero still couldn't shake the weird feeling he'd taken from practicing the technique just once. Not only does he wield massive magical power, but he also blasts out high-level spells over and over like it's second nature. Then he swings a blade in brutal close-quarters fights, patches himself up with healing magic when he gets hurt, and even carries the terrifying potential to awaken a skill called *Absolute Evil ***. He's basically unstoppable, fully cheating, and somehow always gets away with it. The hero's gut told him this story just got wild, like training harder and stacking his crew before things kicked off would have been perfect. Then a knight came charging in from the side, shouting at him. Someone told him, "Mr. Villain is on the line, he wants you right now." A short while later in his father's office, Willen leaned in and told him he'd heard rumors about how hard he'd been studying and how brutal his training had been. Willen, the Ark clan's head, said the next leader would face this too, and now the hero had better buckle down and study hard, because forgetting isn't an option anymore. Willen Ark, the hero's father, runs the kingdom's underground syndicate from the shadows, and at first the hero swore he was a monster, until dealing with the Absolute proved one thing: this villain was just an honest father. When the hero was forced to watch an enemy get tortured, he went stone still. Absolute blurted thanks to his father and swore he'd keep giving it his all, secretly thrilled that his dad hadn't praised him in a while. Villain said, "All right, then we'll skip the intro and jump straight into the main topic." He told us that a royal reception for Prince Michael's 10th birthday was coming next month, put together by the royal family. And this time, his peers would pack the room too, with Absolute expected to show up as well. When the hero heard Prince Michael's name, it felt like he'd just switched sides with the protagonist in the story. The leader admitted he hated to say it, but the hero's skills could spark misunderstandings, so act right at the reception. The hero nodded and asked if the conditions were over yet, and if they were, he'd head straight back to training. Once his son was gone, the leader cracked a smile, secretly testing whether the pressure had even registered, since he didn't shoot back a stare of his own. Shay, the butler and basically the reconnaissance team's quiet operator, reported that the hero's level was already sitting above 40. He found it suspicious right away, like this already blew past the limit. Willen pointed out that by the time the Absolute inherited his spot, he'd almost certainly have climbed to a top power seat in the kingdom, and if it came down to it, he could crush that organization by force and make them fall in line. That's exactly how he did it back then too. The butler fired off the truth. This is why they de-followed him, yet he had zero good name, and the leader only shrugged, saying it was just the Ark family's nature. The villain preached that only clear, undeniable power mattered, so anyone watching would get it instantly, while violence came second and a good reputation didn't mean a thing at all. The butler just let out a weary sigh. Shai said that to win the trust of the nobles, they had to make Mr. Absolute look better, because if they didn't, their whole group would start falling apart soon. Sometime later, the capital's royal castle buzzed as the hall filled with aristocrats. There, the hero's father stepped forward and greeted His Royal Majesty and His Highness Mikkel. He burst out congratulating them on this glorious day, and the king turned to the Duke of Ark thanking him, and then he spotted the child standing nearby. The hero said, "We're meeting for the first time," then introduced himself to the king as Absolute Ark, and the king already knew his name. The prince's eyes locked with the hero's, then he snapped his gaze aside, wearing pure displeasure. The hero froze in place. Vayan yanked his son close and said it was time to go, then a groan burst from behind them and they spun around. Count Jose strode up and their leader shot him a question. "How's it going?" Jose said he was doing just fine, all thanks to them, while the hero muttered that loyal aristocrats were the real headache because the Ark family sat in the high nobility, yet somehow they never had a single job to do. Count Jose said he'd heard the Duke's son was here today and he wanted to get permission to bring his own boy up. He shoved the kid forward and the hero just watched. The Absolute interrogated him on the spot, demanding his name, so the child answered loud and clear, "Chris Jose of the Count's Jose family." The hero stepped in, introduced himself, and they traded quick pleasantries, but the moment he thought about how even the aristocracy carried hostility, fear clenched his heart for what's coming next. No choice left, he has to kick off the conversation right there, face to face. The hero was convinced this was the very first move to stop his collapse from happening. He snapped his head around and said, "He's probably already greeted most of you, so adults' room is farther down, go on, take the hall straight across and meet me there." The hero stormed into the hall they pointed out. When he showed up, every kid around him went still, faces twisting with every emotion, while whispers and judgment hit his ears and rage started to burn in his chest. Everybody around him snapped into panic and bolted away. He caught a scream from the side. Someone swore their clan was tied to a secret underground crew and they had the guts to show up at the celebration, and the hero snapped to attention. A bunch of kids huddled on the floor, one got beaten while the others circled them yelling, "Get lost, right now." And then the hero snapped back to that book about the absolute, feeling the loneliness in it and finally understood why it all spiraled like this. One attacker launched a wild swing at Chris, screaming that if they didn't get out of there, this would turn into something worse than scum. Then Chris shut his eyes and braced for impact. Every single person snapped to attention as a voice demanded the attacker what he thought he was doing. Then panic hit, bodies went still, and they all spun in horror to see the one they feared most. Chris watched the hero stride right up to them, growling that he'd demand answers again if they didn't respond. He stood in front of the crew, shielding them from harm, and demanded to know why they were messing with the Ark family's aristocrats. He pointed out that right among the group, there was someone who had clearly been hurt by violence. Ark stopped, listened to their reasons, stared the offenders down, and told them he'd forgive them if their answer could convince him. He looked ahead and saw nothing but small fry drunk on their numbers, so bold it was downright disgusting. Ark told everyone straight up, raise a hand against an Ark supporter and you're basically picking a fight with the whole Ark clan, right? With a cold, menacing stare, he said he'd memorized their faces, then warned them to lather up their necks and wait, and the kids bolted in terror. In the empty hall, he finally turned to the victims, and they were still shaking, huddled there on the floor. The hero remembered too late that he'd left the skill on, so he slammed cancel. Chris dropped to his knees, bowed, and thanked him for saving them. He swallowed his pride and begged forgiveness for dragging shame onto the Arch faction. Ark leaned in toward Chris, and Chris shut his eyes tight. He slapped his hand onto the kid's shoulder, and a bright glow exploded in its wake, leaving the child staring in shock. The hero snapped into recognition, Chris from the Count's clan, Jose, and saw how badly he'd gone downhill. Chris kept apologizing, basically admitting he'd dragged his opponent into that disgusting mess in front of all those high-ranking nobles, and since they couldn't fight back, the tension exploded into full-blown chaos. Then Chris snapped, saying he owned everything and begged forgiveness for the rest. Behind them, the girl shot to her feet, bowed hard, and apologized for the interruption, then introduced herself as Lady Claire of the Viscount Claire line, saying Mr. Chris had stood up for her and got hurt, and that the injury was her fault. She told him to at least go ask Mr. Chris, but the hero had zero clue what was even happening. The hero caught himself wondering if Chris was somehow more popular than him, and nah, it wasn't jealousy, not even a little. Ark told them he got it, but this wasn't just Chris or just one person, this was their shared mistake, and he pressed them. Do you understand why? Absolute called on Chris to address the whole crowd, and Chris snapped back that everyone had been treating them like easy targets, because their nobility was low. Ark must have seen it from the start too, knowing their reputation was trash, and then the hero demanded to know why they were all gathered here. Absolute said, they don't have anyone from the upper aristocracy in our ranks, and that means we're about to get hunted by everyone else. Chris dropped his head and hot tears surged up before he could stop them. Chris blared out, yelling, so what are we doing now? Then Ark fired back, why didn't you wait for me? The kids were stunned. Ark snapped that this whole mess happened because they were low-ranked while their opponent was high-ranked, and if he'd been there, it would have been obvious he couldn't pull at their hearts the way he wanted. He figured this time the real blame lay on their opponents, and he wasn't even done studying them yet. Then they bolted without waiting, terrified that the ones they'd just pointed at could be guilty too. As Ark said it, he made it crystal clear, if they choose to act, then they've got to own what comes next too. So he decided to punish them, and the children immediately turned pale with terror. The hero barked that from here on out in events or during studies, everyone would stay where he could see, because this was their punishment. He figured being near him would feel awful, but they had no choice but to stick it out, and worst of all, the people he couldn't shield might turn on him and betray him. Chris burst into tears, crying out for Lord Ark. Then the hero snapped back, don't twist this, saying it was all for the Ark house because if they couldn't protect him, everything would fall apart. At last, he warned them that next time they wouldn't dare drift from his side without his say-so, because that's what a ruler demands. And the kids cheered him on, eyes shining with pure admiration. Ark showed off his skills and said, this is how you mash water magic with wind magic. Then he pointed out that Claire's power is pure water and wind, and with it, the possibilities are huge. He handed the element he'd forged to Claire, and her eyes widened because she realized he didn't just have magical power, he had total control too, and Chris couldn't help but be stunned by it as well. She basically marveled like, of course it would be like this, Mr. Absolute, and he just smirked back, yeah, that's a given. Fired up, the girl decided to train on the spot. Then Ark straight up asked Chris if he had fire magic and Chris confirmed it, though he warned that fusion magic and stuff like that is brutal for him. The hero told him fire magic isn't one size fits all, it changes with your training level, and he should hammer on what he's best at, so Chris took that advice to heart. After Prince Michael's birthday bash, Chris and the ladies kicked off a fresh start, fixing old mistakes by setting up training sessions and throwing tea parties together. The hero felt the distance shrinking in real time, and Chris hesitated before shouting his name. Chris couldn't wait to question him about the magic he'd pulled off at the reception, and the hero shot back that it was healing magic. Yeah, Chris already knew, but it still hit him like a shock. Chris heard the hero was a total menace with magic and a blade, and the crazy part was how young he was. Like, how is that even possible? The maids marched up to the boys and shouted, "Young masters." They asked the kids if they wanted a quick break. Later, once everyone sat at the table for a snack, Lady Claire couldn't even hide her shock, because this hero didn't just command fire, water, earth, and wind, he also had healing dark magic. The girl gushed about how much she admired him, and the hero replied that she was the kind of woman who makes a man's protective instincts snap awake. The hero smirked and said that having useful spells on you isn't the real big deal, because when the fight starts, something else decides everything. Unique magic is an inherited gift locked to a specific bloodline. Only after you're officially recognized as the heir at age 15 or older can you wield it, no matter how gifted you are. Chris leaned in and said, "So the Art Clan's special magic is summoning, right?" Ake nodded and broke it down. This power calls up spirits, even the wild ones like the 12 top-tier spirits from the Spirit King clan. This magic was so brutal it could erase up to 40% of the enslavement squad, and the boy clung to one hope above everything: she'd never betray him. Absolute swore 100% sure that he'd take it someday. Claire gasped at how incredible it all was while Chris just froze in place, and then the clock kept ticking, 5 long years until the inheritance. So yeah, 5 long years still stand between him and the school entrance event from the original story, and he's convinced he'll be left with zero supervision while he prepares. Chris, the hero, leaned in and told her he wanted the maid ready by the time he got back from school. Then he demanded she let him pick and train a servant from his own place, and he asked Count Jose for permission to talk it over. Chris said it might work, then leaned in and asked if it wouldn't be faster to just pick one of the Ark family's servants. The hero shot back that he couldn't stand the people living in this house. The kids were stunned and the hero started to worry maybe they were onto him, because in the original tale everyone had turned against him, so he needed a sure thing who wouldn't betray his trust. He believed a servant would stay loyal to his master, and he refused to give the protagonist even one opening. The hero remembered her, this old woman who once wore a maid's uniform when he was born, but she's been gone for 3 years and now her daughter MIT has been taking care of him for 48 years. But the Ark family's mansion now looks like a full-on mature maid cafe, and it's downright outrageous. Chris got it, nodded, and promised to train the top-tier servants, then leaned in and demanded to know what requirements they had. The hero said the race didn't matter at all, what they should get was real knowledge of self-defense. Claire shot her hand up and grilled the hero about her chances, but he shut her down fast, saying it wasn't worth it, and that sting lit a fire in her chest. Chris stepped in, nodded like he got it, and promised he'd fix everything for her. Jose swore he'd reach out to the hero the moment everything was ready, and the hero shot up from the table telling him, "I'm counting on you." The hero blurted out to the maid, MIT, who was standing off to the side. With shaking hands, they flung a blanket over the boy's shoulders, and side by side with the hero, they hurried away, leaving the other children behind. Chris and Claire stared as they vanished into the distance. The girl said the family servants were terrified of Mr. Absolute too, and it'd probably be just as bad at the academy, while Chris admitted he hadn't been paying close attention, and the girl couldn't help feeling for the hero, then decided she'd comfort him. Chris snapped at Claire, asking why she was acting like that. Was it really just who she was? Claire smirked and said it was because Mr. Absolute wasn't nearly as rigid as everyone thought. She knows she has to keep acting like this if she wants to get closer to him, and sure, he looked irritated, but he never shut her down. Chris then asks if that whole in love vibe is nothing but a lie. She shot back, "Nope, this is pure love." She didn't get Mr. Absolute either, just like him, and then she walked away, leaving him standing there alone, yet at that reception he ended up helping them anyway. Claire shot a quick look and said Chris had to have already been warned about the absolute evil skill, because as soon as she heard the story, her chest tightened hard. So she decided if Mr. Absolute ever thought he'd be abandoned again in the future, this time she'd make damn sure she was right there with him. Plus, the girl decided to face everything with a laugh because with other people around, she didn't have to hold back. She wanted the hero to see her as someone with a huge heart. Chris shot back, saying it felt the same. He'd never ditch Lord Absolute and he'd stack his entourage with allies because it was his duty to him. The girl nodded right along. Then as they walked out, the boy admitted he'd made the right call by going straight to Claire first, and she agreed too. She beamed and teased, "Come on, doesn't a handsome high nobleman have a bright future?" Then she basically shoved the idea into everyone's heads, discouraged the other girls from flirting with him and quietly set the stage for that future, while he pressed her hard, asking if her feelings were real. Smiling to himself, Jose wondered if it'd be smarter for Mr. Absolute to stack up allies. A bit later, the hero stepped out of the carriage and the butler told him to stay sharp, promising he'd be waiting right there. The hero showed up at Count Jose's place, stepping into the grand mansion run by a servant merchant. Inside, the hero ran straight into the count, who welcomed him with a warm smile, thanked him for coming and pressed him to be gentler with him, just today. The count also admitted he'd picked a whole bunch of servants at your request, then promised Chris would ride alongside the hero so if he needed anything at all, he could just tell Chris. The count whipped out a quick apology to the guards, saying they weren't needed at all, then beckoned the hero inside, explaining that those rules were just putting his servants in chains so he could finally settle in his own comfort. The hero stepped up and flat out said, "You don't need to cut the price, I'm not going to live in debt." The count nodded, understanding perfectly. Beaming, the hero thanked the count for his hard work, and the count shot back a grateful smile. Chris stepped into the room and told them point-blank that from now on he'd bring the servants in one at a time, each one locked down by the contract skill, so they'd never cause trouble. And he waved them toward a chair and ordered, "Wait." He demanded that someone tell him the second anyone showed interest in the hero. Plopping down, Absolute stared at the customized system and realized this was his first and last purchase, so he had to pick perfectly, like choosing a whole house. After shooting Chris a quick thank you for the wait, Chris ushered in the first servant. A girl with animal ears materialized in front of him, eyes streaming with tears, then sniffed out, "I'm Vul from the wolf tribe and I'm 8. And just like that, she begged him to choose her. Chris declared that he was ready to start bringing the servants in one by one, and he told the hero to warn him the moment someone caught his interest. Val, a girl, claimed she was from the wolf tribe, swore she was 8 years old and begged to join him, and that request totally stunned the hero. The hero thought she looked like she was seconds from breaking down, and it felt awful to see that same tear-ready reaction over and over, yet even Chris's response shocked him because he'd expected him to get mad at the girl. Absolute grilled Chris, asking if Wool was too young to learn martial arts, and Chris shot back that she was young. But wolves are born wolves, and even as kids they're stronger than everyone around them. He said she was sitting at level 18 right now, and with her growth potential he told her to grab Vol's mercy and transmutation, because the hero was so impressed he knew doing it this way would have saved him from any nasty surprises. "You'd better grab servants when they're young, she's terrified right now, but if you treat her right she'll calm down fast." The hero nodded and told Chris he agreed. And then, for no reason at all, the girl suddenly snapped, screaming as she begged and cried. The hero grimaced like he should have been more careful this time, and Chris was snapping angry at her again, so he cut it short and said they'd leave it there for now and call the next one. The hero's jaw dropped when he laid eyes on the next candidate. The girl introduced herself as Elizabeth, age 43, and promised that if he took her, she'd treat the young gentleman right, so the hero wasted no time and called for the next one. The next candidate burst into the room. She looked them in the eye and said, "I'm Maria Stella, I'm 15. The second the hero heard that name, it sparked like deja vu, like he'd heard it before. Chris then spilled the truth. Maria used to be a noblewoman crushed into servitude because she couldn't cough up a massive debt, but don't get it twisted, she's still a dead-sure, hard-hitting knight. He told him she still hadn't awakened her magical powers, and just like that, the hero snapped to attention and remembered her right away. Maria Stella is a character from the novel, an older sister type who starts out icy as stone, but once she's released, she claws her way into the protagonist's life and refuses to let go. In the book, the girl teased the hero, "Are you already wiped out?" and offered to loan him her knees but told him when he wakes up they're right back to training. She giggled and told the protagonist his face was adorable, then even helped him wash up. The hero's face burned with embarrassment, so he called those book scenes inappropriate and warned that if he pulled Maria to his side, it would gut the protagonist's power. Once her training was done, Maria would finally be able to wield magic with enough raw potential to change everything. Then the hero made his move. He told Chris his choice. Chris figured it was Elizabeth, but the hero thought Chris was trying to push him around, so he declared he'd pick Maria and Wool and demanded a contract. He didn't say much, but he quietly apologized to Chris since Elizabeth could handle it solo. The hero signed the documents and the Count declared everything was finally set. The girls stepped aside, Vol shook like crazy, and Maria's anger was blazing. He leaned in and told the girls, "From this day on, I'm your master and you're both serving me as maids." Wool shrieked that they'd just heard the hero was one of the kingdom's most feared villains. When Maria found out the hero came from the Art clan, fury surged through her like fire, and the hero snapped back that once they understood where he stood, her disgust made perfect sense. She snapped at him, demanding what he planned to do with them, and swore she'd rather die than ever lift a hand for something cruel. The hero realized that the very fact of where he came from lit a fire of hostility in them, and when he swore he wasn't here to kill them, it was clear the two of them still didn't get how bad their situation really was. He snapped that they were his servants now and warned them not to forget it. Then he slammed his sphere skill into them as payback for their insolence. The girls started panting and dropped to their knees, and the hero snapped at them to watch their words, then asked, "Got it?" The girls rushed to apologize right away, and the hero smugly patted himself on the back in his head for making those two women give in. Sometime later at the Ark family mansion, someone snapped Maria's name, and she spun around instantly. The maid leaned in and asked the girl how she was holding up and if she'd finally settled into the work yet. MIT said she'd mostly adjusted, but the start scared her because she feared they'd make her do something humiliating, and Smith finally reassured her that once all was said and done, she was just doing an everyday job. Emmett bombarded Maria with questions about Mr. Absolute, and she froze because she truly had no idea what to say. She confessed that at first she was freaking out about being stuck with him, but after watching his life for the last few months, she's got no clue what to think anymore, because that gentleman is weirdly quiet, unlike the rest of the Ark family. The hero's speech is packed with fancy, thunderous threats, words sharp enough to cut most of it so cold and lifeless, until his face suddenly spills everything like an open book. He's never laid a hand on his servants or his nobles, and the people watching him can't help but think really highly of him. Emmett told Maria it was right, told her to stay exactly like that, yet Maria just couldn't get what she meant. A deafening crash erupted behind her, and the frightened girl bolted toward the sound, demanding to know what just happened. Turns out it was Vol who smashed the vase, and the hero was right there, comforting her, so Maria couldn't wrap her head around why he acted like a complete jerk when he was nothing of the sort. His wild moves left the girl frozen in horror, completely baffled. A few months later, Maria leaned in and demanded to know if Mita really planned to quit in just a couple months, only for the old woman to nod and confirm it. The girls had already nailed the maid's chores, so Wool could run the cleaning on her own now. Her job was done. With a steady look, she told the girls to watch over the master and stand ready in her stead. Maria leaned in and asked Mita straight up, "Aren't you scared of Mr. Absolute?" The old woman admitted she'd be lying if she said she wasn't scared. Then she leaned in and asked if the girl could see it another way. Now that she'd officially become Mr. Absolute's maid, she finally had the right to learn what he could do, absolute evil. Hearing that, Maria bristled and snapped that this horrible impression happened because of his raw strength. MIT says the Ark family's servants feel for their young master so deeply that they can't help slipping into secret missions, and that's why he's gotten stone serious, barely smiling at all. She said this was on the adults to handle, knowing she was asking way too much of her since Maria was still so young, yet she still told Maria to keep supporting the master. And with that, Maria was already planted at the hero's door, declaring she was going inside. The hero whipped around, and there stood Maria. She confessed she'd stepped in for Mrs. Mitt and would be taking care of him from now on, then revealed Mrs. Mitt had already told her about the hero's deadly skill. The hero mumbled it off like it didn't sting at all, and the girl leaned in, asking, "Are you sure it doesn't bother you?" The hero basically snapped, "Who cares what anyone thinks? Because in the end, he's pure absolute Ark, this is who he is, and he'll say it loud, and deep down he knows everyone's going to see him their own way." Maria locked onto his eyes and saw the blend of unwavering determination and crushing sadness. With that kind of grit, he refuses to quit. He'll keep living even while the pain rages on. The girl flung her arms wide and out of nowhere wrapped her arms around him from behind in a surprise hug. Ashamed, the boy demanded to know what she was doing and snapped, "Get out!" But she brushed off his screams and called his name anyway. She told him, "From this day on, I'm staying right beside you, servant, maid, sister," then begged him to let her mend the ache in his heart, swearing she'd never, ever leave him alone. He let out a heavy sigh, said he got it all, then begged them to let him go so he could get a bath ready. The girl asked if she should join him and he snapped back that she shouldn't, yet somehow they still ended up soaking together in the bath. Across town, the stranger flashed a grin, clenched an object in his fist, and promised he'd use it to smash the Ark family. At the table, Willen leaned in and grilled his son, "Tell me you got it all." The man had said it a dozen times. This kingdom didn't just need the Ark family, it depended on them. Keep the crown's messy business in order, tame the royal troublemakers, and handle the delicate ties with foreign noble houses too, and when the Absolute heard that, he snapped back, "I understand everything." At first, the Ark clan looked like nothing but villains, but really they were silent heroes, hiding in the shadows to shield the nation, and with betrayal looming from his own side, the prince could get crushed by rejection later because serving the royal family is a dangerous, high-stakes gamble. The hero slammed his hands together and figured he needed countermeasures fast. Then he turned to his father and demanded to know what his job was this time. The villain snapped that the capital's got gangs with zero ties to the Ark family, and they're throwing a wrench into how the empire rules, about 300 enemies lining up against them. He commanded the hero to wipe them all out, so not one soul would be left standing. As he stormed out of his father's office, the hero's mind snapped straight to the gang in the aquamarine territory right on the border between Lanana and the Empire. His top suspects? A family hanging close to the imperial palace. One name kept flashing in his head, Duke Noir. The Noir family is infamous for running underground schemes, and now they're pushing their power into new lands, so the kingdom of Lanana is getting hit next. The Noirs and the Arks may want totally different things, but their old feud never dies. This is an institutional rivalry at war. Then the hero bursts into the hall and calls out for Maria and Vul. He told the girls he'd been handed a mission and that they'd have to handle the prep without him. Then Maria shot him a question, "So, are you going somewhere?" He confirmed it, and the girl immediately asked if she could go with him. She swore she wouldn't be a burden, and right away Vul started begging them to come with him, so the hero yanked on his cloak and snapped back that it wasn't necessary because he could handle it all by himself. He said, "I might not make it back by night, so don't wait on me, go on to bed." The girls stared at him with teary eyes, nodded, and promised they'd follow the order, then urged him to watch himself and stay careful. Aquamarine territory, this man raged at the crowd, promising that if they crushed the leader of the rival family, they'd defend their country. He thrust his staff up and roared that the Ark family's time had run out, and the crowd erupted with cheers. But one guy felt the danger too late because someone was already dropping in from above to take him out. The hero unleashed his black hole skill, and in an instant, darkness yanked the people straight out of sight. Tech finally got back and stared in pure horror as the leader screamed for everyone to calm down, insisting it was only teleportation magic, and the ones who dodged should strike, yet right then his men were already dropping dead. When he spotted the corpses, he exploded into a furious shout, demanding to know what the hell was wrong with them. When he finally reached the leader, the hero slammed him with a brutal wound right as the man screamed, then kept hammering down one fighter after another until they dropped. When the hero finally wrapped it up, he couldn't believe it. This was the whole thing, over and done, and it felt like a colossal waste of time, but he still had no clue what they meant by unsung heroes. As he yanked the cart along beside the horse, the hero snapped that they were pathetic pecks, stewing over the royal family being totally hopeless while he swore he needed real strength. The hero needed power to survive the enemy swarm, and that was all his mind could handle. Then he snapped his eyes to someone across the carriage. The unknown man tried to vanish, but the head that dropped beside him terrified him, so once it hit the ground, he fell too and shrieked in pure fear. The stranger screamed that she worked for the Noir family and warned that if the hero even laid a hand on him, they'd never just sit back. So the hero pressed again, demanding the truth about the Noir family. Laughing through his teeth, the Absolute said this was exactly what he needed, a real opponent at last, but before anything else, the servant had to die. The boy scrambled back, breathing hard, demanding answers. Who was he, and why did he do this? The hero stared him down and finally said, "I'm evil." At the end, he snarled that he was just as evil as all of them, and then he unleashed a black hole. Soon after, Absolute tore back to the mansion and the servant was already waiting. Maria rushed up to greet him and the hero told her, like he'd planned it, that he'd already told her to go straight to bed. Maria shot back that the gentleman wasn't just standing around, he was carrying out his duty to the country. She wanted to meet him first, so she stepped in immediately. Then he froze, shocked, and asked, "How did you know about this?" Maria said Vol was the one fretting over him, spilling everything to her, and still, Maria couldn't believe it because she never once imagined the Ark family would get stuck with that kind of job. The hero finally clocked it. Vol's whole power was hunting enemies. Then Maria slammed into his arms and in his head he grumbled, "What a brat," vowing to roast her later for the lie. The hero didn't get what kind of hug this was supposed to be. Maria just said it meant her master had been fighting for their country the whole time, even while he was still so young, and she absolutely hated that truth. She screamed that it sickened her. These adults in her country were forcing her master to fight. He wrapped her in a hug, insisted he was fine, and told her that from where she stood, nothing bad had happened. Then she snapped back that it wasn't true because he was hurt. She shrieked that his heart was so torn up he couldn't even feel a jolt anymore, and the hero just stared, wondering if he'd gone numb or if it only felt that way. He smirked, convinced she was so wrecked she couldn't even feel pain anymore, so why did his gut scream that he'd messed up? Then the girl snapped, calling his name. He didn't argue at all, he just told her to hit the bed since the night was already dragging on. She had more to say, but she wouldn't be the one to start, so she nodded along and asked if she could sleep next to him tonight. He shut that down and told her it just wasn't worth it. A few days later, the kids were buzzing about a martial arts tournament happening in the capital. Claire leaned in and grilled the hero, demanding to know why he shouldn't jump into the under-15 tournament. She was convinced he'd sweep the whole thing. The hero yanked back, convinced she'd gotten too close, and Chris shot back that he'd be in the under-15 category too, because this was the perfect chance to size up how strong his rivals really were. Jose also heard a huge rumor. This year, a real hero was going to enter the tournament. When word of the hero reached Abalia, curiosity snapped like a lightning bolt. Then, at the Marquis of Murray's estate, the girl burst in breathless at last. She finally found him. A girl shouted over the chaos, yelling that Alt had skipped class again. Alicia Murray. Alt, the boy everyone called a hero, snapped back that he had zero desire to. Early in the morning, our hero slowly started to come to, like the world was tugging him back from sleep. Leaning there, he realized the surface was soft beneath him. Maria Stella, the Ark family's maid, surprised everyone by being almost gentle when she greeted him and asked where he learned to do things like that. Then the hero froze when she calmly said, "It's all fine, my sister will handle everything," and he snapped, yelling, "Get out." Vul, the Ark family's maid, was scrubbing the dishes when Maria stormed over and called her name. She asked if that gentleman had come back to his room yet, and Wool told her, "Yeah, he left right after breakfast," so Maria jumped in to help Wool. Maria clocked that Wool was beaming today, and Wool told her the gentleman had spoiled her with chocolate, so good she'd never even known anything this sweet and delicious existed. Maria grinned, then asked if that meant breakfast had finally gone off without a hitch. Wool's eyes flooded with tears as she blurted out that her master had just chewed her out. Maria heard Wool say she'd been worried about the gentleman, so she'd told him, only for Maria to realize it was her own fault too, since the girl got scolded for eavesdropping with her skill, and Maria hurried over to apologize. She felt the exact same way and pushed the master to lean on them just a little more. Maria already knew he'd spell it out this way, so when Wool asked if she was free today, she explained that she and the master had planned a training match, which is why she'd slipped into the kitchen for a minute. Wool was desperate to join them because she wanted to get way stronger so she could protect the master. Maria leaned in and asked, "You didn't spar yesterday, right?" Then she turned to Wool and demanded, "Hand me the spot." Worry flickered in her eyes, maybe she still had stuff to do. Wool told her she did and Maria snapped, "Then let's crush this together fast." Sometime later, Maria thrust her sword forward and swore to the hero, "Not today, I'm not losing." The Absolute ordered the girl to swing with everything she had, and she bolted straight into battle without hesitation. They kicked off the fight by smashing each other's attacks away, refusing to give an inch. The hero's attacks landed dead on, and the girl's confidence crumbled into nervous fear. They pinned the future on Maria like she was the knight's saving grace, so tell me, how could she fall short of the hero? The hero told Maria to spar again, and when she locked eyes with him, memory crashed in her brother from back then. Back then, her brother Ortega had demanded the same thing too: make the fight happen again right now. That's Maria Stella born into nobility, and while she and her brother were training, a call went out for Maria and Ortego. Her dad was an unbeatable knight, and her mom ran a tight ship, strict as stone but loving as ever. She even had a sweet brother, Ortega, who loved life like it was pure magic. Then one day, their happy family bubble burst and their peaceful world was torn apart. After a while, Maria finally slid up to her mother, who sat beside the bed, and blurted out, "Where are Dad and Ortego?" Maria's mother snapped that even healing magic couldn't touch it. She said there wasn't a cure at all, and Maria screamed that she couldn't be healed. She couldn't believe it. She insisted there had to be some way, because if they didn't find it, her father and brother would never make it. To cure them, they scrounged money from every corner, begging priests for help and stocking up on potions, only for both of them to die anyway. Maria watched her beloved family vanish, and all that's left is a crushing debt, so she has no choice but to follow them, even as she refuses to repay the people who funded her family's treatment with bitterness. The girl snapped that she still had unfinished business, and they demanded to know if she was absolutely sure. Stella carried a priceless sword packed with rare magic, an heirloom meant to be passed down to her from her father. The girl had no way out. She'd already sacrificed everything, yet the debt wouldn't vanish, so the kingdom seized their lands and sold her off as a servant. And the knight's bright promise and peaceful joy were ripped away in an instant. Right now, the hero and Maria kept the fight going, because the moment she first laid eyes on Absolute Arc, she couldn't stand him, even though he was the same age as her late brother. The hero sprang forward, juking the strike at the last second, and the girl went wide-eyed in total disbelief. She doesn't just feel sorry for him, she starts loving the gentleman who tries to act strong while swallowing his pain. She couldn't wrap her head around why the master would let his little sister get bullied like that. Then the duel finally ended with a brutal hit that knocked her sword clean out of her hands. Maria Stella, born to a noble house, clutched her shining sword tight and lunged into battle, her fearless grin blazing as she faced off against her skilled opponent with smooth, confident grace. Suddenly, that familiar voice rang out, and both heroes spun around in pure joy, relief flooding their faces when they spotted their beloved parents out in the distance. Her father was a famous, battle-hardened knight celebrated for deeds of pure courage, and her mother ruled the house with iron discipline, yet loved her with a tenderness that never ran out. Maria paused for a beat, staring hard at that picture: family warmth, pure well-being, like everything was finally exactly right. She had a carefree little brother named Ortega, and he genuinely loved everything around him, like the world was his playground, while their tight-knit family radiated this unstoppable, shining kind of happiness. Then boom, the idol cut off. Maria slipped into the quiet room and found her mother hunched over her sick brother's bed, head bowed in grief. Maria swallowed her fear and turned toward her, thinking about her father and Ortega. The woman only shook her head, slow and helpless. She screamed that even the strongest healing magic couldn't touch it, no spell could cure the disease at all. Maria gasped, refusing to believe it, and the tears instantly burned up in her eyes. She blurted out desperate pleas for a way out, begging that if they didn't find one, her beloved father and brother would die for sure. And as she spoke, the happiest moments they'd ever shared flashed through her mind. They hunted down money for their relatives, scrounging loans from every corner, begging wherever they could, and chugging potions like they'd work. Then nothing did. Both of them died. Girl drowned in grief and swallowed by darkness, despair, and the family's mother couldn't survive the loss. Maria stared at her shattered mother, and terror and loneliness slammed into her heart, because she'd lost her entire beloved family and now she was stuck with only a crushing debt and no one left. It felt like there was no escape from this, so she had to follow them, but deep down she knew she couldn't stand the thought of owing those kind people for helping cover her treatment. The girl hauled herself up, brushing the tears from her eyes like they were nothing, and she swore, right then, that her unfinished business wasn't finished at all. She blinked, and suddenly she was trapped inside a stone hut while a calm voice pressed her to say it out loud. Was she really sure about her choice? Right before her sat the family swords, Stella, pulsing with rare magic, the very power she was meant to take from her father. She stared at the weapon and knew in her bones there was no turning back. She'd already given up everything, and still the debt wouldn't be paid, so their lands were seized by the kingdom, and now she was staring at a future where she'd be nothing but a servant. Just when the night looked bright and Maria's peaceful life felt safe, everything shattered. Maria dropped to the floor. Out of nowhere, sharp sword clashes erupted like thunder. A deadly battle between Maria and the Absolute erupted, and the thunder of steel on steel filled the air. When Maria first laid eyes on the Absolute Arc, same age as her late brother, he instantly came off as an arrogant, nasty kid. Then he suddenly rocketed up into the air and smashed down with his weapon, leaving her stunned and wide-eyed at his wild leap. She felt nothing for that gentleman, no sympathy, no warmth, just saw him trying to look tough while his pain silently broke through. The Absolute snapped his arm forward with razor focus, while the girl shot her sword up high, bracing to parry the incoming strike. Maria was left completely baffled because this young man was torturing her sister and making it happen right in front of her. Confusion flooded her and upset slammed into her chest. The fight finally died down and they stood there staring each other down, still standing, no less. Then the heroine swallowed hard and realized this was her 10th loss in a row, and now the only question crushing her was simple. Who anyone could beat the protagonist, even if it wasn't about sword skills anymore. The boy shrank back and admitted he wasn't certain, but he just knew his father would blow right past his skill level, while Absolute snapped that his dad was an absolute monster. Maria's eyes widened when he said that. Then the young man pressed on. Even if his father stayed loyal to the royal family, he couldn't promise the same kind of full support. The protagonist realized he wasn't even part of the original story, and he had no clue what his father pulled off after the Ark family got convicted, so he told himself they had to be ready for the terrifying chance that he could defect. Maria didn't get what the phrase was saying at all, and the whole meaning completely blew past her. She stood behind him trying to wrap her head around the chaos, and then, boom, he spun around to face her. Absolute threw an apology his way and said, "Let's keep the duel going." But Maria pointed to a bench, clocked how wiped out he looked, and insisted they pause. Then she proudly revealed she'd packed treats because the basket was stuffed with sandwiches. His stomach rumbled like thunder, and you could tell he was more than happy to finally chow down and catch his breath for a bit. They dropped onto the bench together and tore into their meal. Maria pulled the sandwiches from the basket with a bright smile and thrust them into the hands of Absolute. She wiped the crumbs from his face with gentle care, then shoved a towel into his hands so he could dry off fast. He slumped there looking down, then ate in dead silence, barely showing a shred of emotion. She clocked how worn out they both looked, then offered, "Lie down on my lap if you want," and the young man tried to refuse, until someone yanked him by the shoulders from behind and dragged him down. In the next second, Absolute was sprawled across the maid's lap, grinning like he'd hit the jackpot while the maid stared down at him hard. The boy tried to hold it together, but embarrassment sparked and his cheeks flushed. The girl kept grinning and locked eyes with him, like she was trying to read his soul. Absolute blurted out that it was sweet as candy, then a grin hit his face and the anger slid right off him. He finally realized this was the exact scene from that quote he'd read, the one from the original story, and when the girl stroked his head, he smiled like nothing could shake him, feeling weirdly calm for the first time. After a while, they stumbled into a grand room and found themselves staring down at a massive round table. The protagonist slammed down his decision to announce a martial arts tournament in the capital, then a maid hurried up to the table. She said the sweets looked extra mouthwatering today, and the hero vowed they'd definitely head there. Then his comrades erupted with joy. Cruel grinned with pure confidence, fully sure Mr. Absolute would win, practically glowing with joy. Then the boy cut in fast, saying he wasn't taking part at all, and he tossed his cup aside. The cup started dropping like it was doomed, and then he shot forward, snatched it at the last second and steadied it with careful hands. He snatched it out of the air, snapped upright, and realized just how deadly it was. All eyes snapped toward it in shock as what was happening unfolded right in front of them. "I couldn't believe it," I broke into a laugh while I watched. He said. Wool was stepping into the competition, and the girl, still pouring tea for the gentleman, froze as the words finally hit her, clueless at first, until she realized he meant her and saw every eye in the room staring straight at her. Wool had no idea what to say. She snapped her gaze to the master and blurted the question again. Why was it her? Fear shook through her, heat rushed to her cheeks, and then she admitted it, voice trembling. She was weaker than him and she'd disgrace him if they sent her. He leaned in and told her, "Don't sweat it, I trained you," and with that there was no way she'd fold to Churney. He leaned in and said there was one last twist: if she beat the hero, he'd spoil her with the capital's most famous dessert. When she heard the news, joy exploded across her face and she burst out. Absolute made it crystal clear if she snagged the champion title he'd buy her anything she wanted, no limits. Then he whipped around to face the girl and Wool was practically glowing, grinning as she blurted out that she was going to go. The maid exploded into joy, jumping around like she couldn't hold her feelings back. She blurted that Wool wanted fresh weapons and a bunch of cute little extras too, then Chris clocked it. She already acted like she'd won. But becoming a champion isn't just a win, it's the loudest proof that someone's truly strong. The girl pushed her luck and begged the master to finally see just how strong and how insanely useful Wool had become. Her eyes sparkled brighter and brighter. She was desperate to get her hands on those exact sweets. The protagonist strode up to the girl and told her to crush him, then she'd get everything she'd ever wanted. The maid's fists tightened as she vowed she'd win no matter what, and after that they'd absolutely celebrate her victory. Alicia and Alt are gearing up to jump into the tournament. A voice blared from Marquise Murray's estate demanding to know where Alt was, and Alicia Murray spun to her father in frustration, saying the hero was slacking again, and her worries hit hard because she's Alt's fiancé and childhood friend. She was hit with instant scolding and straight up called a fool. They practically begged the girl to be way more careful, because the hero's divine ability was stacked to the max, and whoever could wield that kind of power got crowned a true hero. Their strength was so unstoppable that, long from now, they rose as the nation's fiercest defenders. The father burst out that this is exactly what always happened to him when he got distracted. Then he snapped into focus, telling her it was finally time to face his responsibilities, and the girl listened. They rolled into a dazzling, decorated city, ready for the big upcoming event like nothing could stop them. Side by side they stormed into the capital and barreled straight for the tournament arena, while hero Alt practically radiated pure anticipation. He spun toward Alicia and practically shouted for her to move faster. He was buzzing with anticipation, and Alicia was shocked by how fired up he was today because his non-stop antics always left her getting criticized. The boy clenched his fists and shouted that he'd be the hero, because his job was to fight, not study, so he left the lessons to everyone else, including her, Alicia. The girl snapped back that it didn't matter how savage a hero's power was if it landed in the hands of someone this careless, and the boy just couldn't wrap his head around why she'd say that. She told her that his father had basically ordered him to take the tournament and prove he deserved to be there, like it was just some small thing. Strutting carefree through the city, the young man wondered if anyone out there would finally push him to the limit, and he shot his companion a question about what he knew. Then she suddenly froze in place, because when she stopped, the memory hit her hard. Alicia had already spotted that someone from the Ark family was stepping into the competition, and Alt had warned them. The Ark family wasn't just shady, they were tied to the criminal underworld, and they'd do anything to push their goals forward. He thought it through and realized it was amazing because everything was getting crazier by the second. Alicia didn't get what he was thinking at all, and all she could do was let out a worried sigh. The heroes rush up to the reception desk. At the reception, the organizer didn't beat around the bush. He made it crystal clear that only weapons and skills could be used, and magic was totally off-limits in the tournament. She thrust her finger ahead and ordered them to head straight into the waiting room. Hero Alt whirled around and told Alicia to stay put and that he'd go first. She nodded hard, swore she'd cheer from the stands, and yelled good luck as he headed off. He didn't even look back, he just kept moving, eyes locked ahead, knowing he was going up against the Ark family and that, as a hero, he'd crush them. Then he turned one last time with a grin and promised that every villain would be wiped out. Alicia paused for a beat, then leaned in and whispered, hopeful as ever, please let everything go right. Just then, Mr. Absolute got blindsided from the side by someone coming in fast. Chris told everyone he had to handle something before Wool's performance, and the protagonist nodded like, got it. But then Cruel snapped to attention, wait, are you thirsty, Mr. Absolute? I actually brought some water and I made it myself. The boy spun around, confused, as she offered him water like she'd already planned for this, because the way she was acting set off alarm bells, the kind he'd always feared could happen. He hated that whole situation. He should have studied her closer and really learned who she was, because word on the street said she was the country's best manipulator. Then she smiled and asked whether he wanted his water warm or cold. The hero grabbed a little extra just in case, then demanded the water be room temp, so the girl locked in with magic and poured the glass like it was nothing. She flashed a smile and shoved the glass into the protagonist's hands, then assured him it was fresh, like it was no big deal. The young man took a few sips, then cruel it's just water claim finally got blown out of the water when he grinned and declared it delicious. Hearing that, the girl's face flared crimson and she blushed hard, turning bright red. She shot off a quick thank you to Mr. Absolute, all flustered because, somehow, her water tasted better than anything the other water mages were making, and just when she thought the moment was over, Chris came back and thundered out a loud greeting to him. Cruel dangled a sip of the water she'd been brewing for Chris. The boy blurted, "So what is this special water?" And the Absolute snapped, "Stop, remain silent." Right then, screams erupted across the arena, and the stands snapped to life with roaring spectators. Vul burst into the field and the crowd blew up with cheers while Cruel froze, scratching her head. What weapon was she even supposed to use? It didn't look like claws at all, and nobody had a clue whether the girl would brawl barehanded. Vul's greatest weapon was her jaw-dropping speed. Because those long, low weapons just wouldn't work for her, they forged a new weapon built to wreck someone in a single punch. All the heroes stared at the arena unfolding before them. Cruel lit up with glee, convinced this was just what Mr. Absolute did. Chris, though, couldn't stop worrying. His eyes kept snapping to Wool, because even with her recent massive growth, he feared she still might not have the strength to hold on. The protagonist shut her down from using the address and he smirked like, "Hiding an ace up your sleeve is the oldest trick in the book." He begged his friend to keep watching because that girl had leveled up fast. Out on the battlefield, Wool stood her ground and right away an enemy came charging at her with a ball, lining up the hit. Absolute stepped in like a coach with full confidence, saying he'd been training her while the girl stared ahead, completely locked in and perfectly still. Out of nowhere, her opponent's ball screamed past her face. She snapped her gaze to it and fired right back to counterattack. She leaned in and darted past her opponent in a blink, and Chris couldn't believe how fast she moved. She tore across the arena at full speed, and the young man just couldn't wrap his head around how her opponent kept getting left behind. While the Absolute smiled, watching like she was a wolf, biding her time for the exact moment to strike. The girl dropped onto all fours and lunged at her opponent with her sword, because even in human form she couldn't escape instinct, circling her prey like a feral beast. Suddenly, she exploded forward and slammed a thunderous punch into her opponent. Beastmen were gorgeous, but this wasn't beauty anymore, it was raw power, poured into every ounce of her strength. The boy shot forward, then crumpled and laid flat in the middle of the arena, defeated, and Chris just stood there, stunned by how unstoppable that win was. He admitted his weapon choice made sense and apologized for his hesitation, and Cruel praised the protagonist's sharp foresight. Then the young man, silent and stone-faced, decided that praise was way too harsh. The next duel was meant to be against another hero, so the protagonist snapped tense, bracing for the win that felt like it was about to hit any second. He could feel it, his opponent had a special skill waiting to strike, and in the original story he still came out on top, powered by everyone's support as his strength surged. He stared the situation down, then decided to put his limits to the test. Hero Alt strode into the arena, eyes locked on the attacker who'd just drawn a raw deal with his opponent. The opponent, clearly not getting it, snapped that Alt shouldn't have been underestimated. Alt slid into a fighting stance, grinned sharp as he told him to watch and learn. He swung his weapon into action, and a brutal battle erupted with every hit echoing like ringing steel. The protagonist stared in silence, then snapped his head toward Chris and demanded, "So you're the real deal, huh, true hero?" Chris nodded, and right then they saw Alt fighting like his life depended on it. The hero clocked it fast. Alt wasn't weak, he just wasn't using his hero skill right at all. He kept swinging his sword on pure brute force, and that rough, reckless style made his tactics look way worse than Vol's. A roaring crowd stared at the battle, and the heroes couldn't stop watching either, because Alt had finally done it and the wind blew everyone away. Chris guessed Alt wasn't exactly seasoned, but he caught the truth. Almost nobody had the same edge as the ultimate. The kid's eyes snapped bright with excitement. He remembered how the hero was supposed to be the one doing the ugly work while the Ark family lurked in the shadows. So this young man would have stacked up experience, climbed higher, and forged a stronger mind, yet he couldn't stop worrying about where the country was headed. The last round of the Moscow Under-15 martial arts tournament kicked off, and Hero Alt marched straight into a pitch-black corridor, charging toward the arena. He wears that smug grin, soaking in the fact that he actually made it this far, and he proudly admits the guys he's faced aren't exactly weak. Still, he's convinced none of them can touch him because in his eyes he's the real hero. One more win and he's basically stepping into the champion's spotlight because he's sure the Arc family's opponent is about to get crushed, so Alt told Acilia to keep a razor-sharp eye on the next match. A sudden flash of light blasted across the whole arena and hero Alt clenched his resolve. He was coming back, proving he truly deserved the title of a hero. Will lock eyes on every move her opponents make because the second their stares collide in the center of the arena, both fighters snap into battle mode. They edged into place, locked eyes, and got ready for the killing blow. Then a thunderous roar shattered the air, kicking off the grand final duel between Alt and Vol, and the heroes shot each other quick, tense looks. A piercing alarm blared. Vol lunged at her opponent in a heartbeat, and the hero Alt froze for a split second, thrown off by the sheer suddenness of the strike. He lunged toward her and demanded answers about what happened to the Arc family, but she just kept darting around him at breakneck speed. Suddenly, she froze in place, staring like she just cracked a secret, then murmured that she was doing it for her master. The young man never caught a word of it. She lifted her head, flashed her fangs with a daring smile, and locked in with pure, focused intent. Alt froze, shocked to see that, even with her young, fragile look, a cold, predatory glint burned in her eyes, while he stood there baffled, trying to figure out what kind of horrible training they'd shoved into the Arc house to make her like this. The boy screamed for the Arc family name of the person who ordered her to join the tournament, and the girl shot back that if she won, she'd get a mouth-watering meal, so yeah, she was ready to crush it. She shot forward in a hard sprint, refusing to waste a single second on a long fight. Bull blasted her opponent's sword away with sheer brute force. The hero shuddered and his hands started to shake, then he clocked her brutal speed and raw strength and a scary thought hit him. Was she running on nothing, always starving? The boy snapped in rage, spinning on the arcs and swearing he'd never forgive them, while the girl shrank in fear and darted across the field, determined not to get caught. She slammed blow after blow into his sword as he braced it like a shield. The hero fought to stay on her heels, blown away by her insane speed. Vol moved so fast it looked like there were multiple versions of her streaking across the field, all lightning quick and razor agile. Right behind Alt, the girl popped up like a jump scare, then slammed a brutal kick at his back, but it clanged right off his sword again. Alt snapped in anger, groaning that fighting a tiny girl was harder than it looked, and told her not to underestimate him. He snapped his hand forward and carved the air with a decisive, razor-sharp swing. He peered ahead and found nothing, not a soul in front of him. Where the heck did his opponent vanish to? Acilia's voice blasted from the stands. Look down. The boy froze in place, then a punch from below slammed into his jaw. Wool's technique delivered the hit like a hammer, and Acilia in the stands snapped her breath out, staring at the impact. Chris shot to his feet, stunned, while Absolute grinned like he was loving every second of the spectacle unfolding. Hero Alt started to topple, and blood poured from his nose. He slammed onto the ground, still as stone. Wolves huddled nearby, watching with shaky nerves. The crowd didn't know what to do with that sudden ending. Then, boom, the stands erupted into shouts. Everyone erupted into cheers, screaming that Wool had won, while the girl stood right in the middle of the arena, looking completely thrown off. She flashed a grin and practically begged for the promised sweets like she could taste them already. Meanwhile, Acilia Murray seethed at her friend's defeat. Wool confidently won the competition, and Absolute Arc let out a satisfied grin after it. The massive arena erupted in pure joy, and the heroes leaned over their seats in the stands, watching every second unfold. The girl faced her defeated opponent head-on while the crowd erupted with wild, cheering roars. Cruel burst out, grinning like they struck gold, saying they really had won. Then they kept their eyes locked on Wool in the arena, tracking her every move while she flicked quick, cautious glances around. The protagonist calmly warned that whoever wielded power like that could spell real trouble for them. Then it turned out the user was way too green to unleash it all. He coldly figured this out. If that guy had even one clean hit on Wall, they'd be finished for good, so she didn't give him a single chance to swing. The protagonist flat-out swears that Wool is the absolute strongest thing in this whole arena. After a while, the three of them creep down a long, dim corridor, step by careful step. In the original story, Alt got crushed because his fighting sense was trash, so if he'd closed in back then, they might have actually wiped out their opponents. From here on out, he can't lose track of the hero for a second. Right out of nowhere, Wool popped up ahead, spun to her master and beamed, "I'm back." Then she pleaded for sweets and begged to be let out for shopping, so when the young man spotted the maid, he grinned and held out his hand. He showered the girl with praise for her hard work and promised her a huge reward, and Wool lit up like a sunrise with pure joy. He told her to grab absolutely whatever she wanted, and she lit up with pure, unstoppable joy. In that bright room, Alt sprawled on the bed, crushed and beaten, while Alicia sat right beside him watching in silence. She couldn't believe it. Even as a hero, he still lost. The boy lay there drenched in sweat, eyes shut tight. The girl clocked it instantly. He was swinging on pure muscle alone, praying that getting crushed would somehow knock sense into him. She struggled to put words together, and Alicia couldn't shake the question of why her father didn't build a real countermeasure instead of leaning completely on Alt. She couldn't stand the unfairness of getting scolded for Alt's absences, even though she'd end up responsible for his education in the end. Still, she pushed herself harder than ever. And it was the father who stepped in and decided to shelter the hero. Suddenly, Alt snapped his eyes open and there was Alicia right beside him. She gasped his name, blurted that he was finally awake, and hurriedly asked how he was feeling. Confusion flickered in the hero's eyes, and in a low voice he admitted he'd lost. Alicia nailed him with that truth and demanded to know if he'd finally learned his lesson. Bolting upright in bed, the hero slammed his fist down and announced, with absolute certainty, that he'd just made a decision that would change everything. Alicia Murray blinked in shock, sure he finally got it. Then she blurted out, "I did believe in you and in your sense of duty." Alt's brow nodded, and with iron resolve he declared he was going to rip the Ark family apart. The girl blinked in disbelief and demanded, "Say it again." After that finale, he stared at the girl and snapped, "Those nobles who tormented her and made her fight don't deserve to exist. Those whispers about the Ark clan's wickedness weren't rumors at all, they were dead-on true." Stunned, Alicia couldn't make sense of what he was saying. She threw her hands out and declared that the Ark family sat in the high nobility. The girl figured that meant one thing for a hero, but for a common kid like him, wiping out the high nobility was pure recklessness, because if he tangled with them, the Murray family would pay the price. Still, the boy was already cooking up plans to smash his opponents, and Acelia had to ask again, "Are you even listening?" The hero snapped around to his friend and swore they had to wipe out the Art family together, but the girl just shook her head. He wasn't even hearing a word she said. Alt admitted he couldn't take them down by himself, but he swore that with her at his side, they'd make it. Alicia snapped back sharply, telling him he'd better not mess around like that. She made it crystal clear she wouldn't back him up with those baseless arguments. If she was going to back him, he'd better come up with a truly convincing reason, and then build an unbeatable army to back it up. Only then could that girl really stand by him, so when he heard it, the young man instantly snapped to attention. Alicia warned him to steer clear of the Ark family for now because she refused to let the Murray clan pay for whatever mess he or she might cause. The boy hung on every word she said, then seized his weapon, yanking himself up from the bed as it all clicked in his head. She wanted him to summon the royal soldiers and smash the nobles, and that's what he decided. Alicia was thinking something else. He stood up, flashed her a bright smile, and swore, no doubt in his mind, that he'd do it for her. The girl jolted like lightning had hit her, frozen by his unbreakable resolve. Then, right on cue, a fresh message from Prince Michael landed at the Arkoff estate. An order tore through the air: "Bring Wool to the palace, no delays." Remember that young man they just celebrated with a reception? Michael was one of the hero's biggest supporters back in the original story, so the Absolute shut its foot down and declared they couldn't let the prince turn into their enemy now. Absolute snapped his head toward Vol and told him they were heading straight for the palace. Prince Michael had summoned them, and now they were moving. Wool's body shook with terror and she couldn't figure out what she'd done wrong, so panic snapped into place and she started fearing she was about to be killed. The young man rushed in to calm her down, swearing that nobody would ever dare lay a hand on her, then went on that maybe the prince had noticed her at the tournament and just wanted to claim her for himself, something like that, until the girl finally breathed the prince's name in a whisper. Tears burned at the edge of her eyes. She couldn't make sense of why she was so terrified, so she demanded, "Master, do you hate me? We're gonna hold on to every single moment they shared forever." But he grabbed her confidence and swore she had nothing to fear. He'd never let her go. He told her, "You can always refuse the prince if you don't want to join his side," and then swore he'd do everything he could to keep her safe. Absolute said that when it's all said and done, she's still stuck playing his maid. Vol's face lit up with joy as she darted to her master, clinging to him tight and swearing with every ounce of her heart that she fully trusted him. The heroes burst into the palace moments later and they got the news: their mission had already succeeded. Crown Prince Michael Lanana of the kingdom shot them a royal greeting, then waved Ark and Vul to come sit down. The moment everything snapped to the prince. They dropped into the chairs facing each other, staring in shock at the endless guards across from them. Every inch of that room was swarmed with guards, and the protagonist couldn't shake the feeling it was way too many just for basic protection. Michael leaned in and told them the truth. Since he was next in line for the throne, every move was watched like a hawk, and if anyone so much as threatened his life, it could trigger a full-blown disaster. Sure, this would be uncomfortable, but he begged for just a little patience. Wool's rage exploded and a brutal aura roared around her until the boy stepped in, soothed her, and insisted, "Everything's okay." Michael chose to dig into the real reason behind their summons, and when he said it wouldn't take long, just long enough to bring them under control, Absolute Ark's eyes sharpened with cold resolve. Michael jabbed his finger at Vul and ordered her to come with him, promising to let the protagonist off the hook if she agreed. He snapped that he was done with all of this, shocked they'd come all this way just to say that, and swore they'd leave. Then, out of nowhere, a razor-bright sword flashed and got thrust straight at the hero. Every guard snapped their weapons out at once, ready to strike, while one stayed locked on the Absolute, sword raised, sights fixed. Ark demanded to know what they were planning, and why the guards had already unsheathed their swords. The boy spun toward them and, like it was his final warning ever, roared that they needed to sheath their swords, right now. Every guard trembled with fear, and Michael just stood there, watching the chaos unfold with a laugh. Michael shot out of his seat, stunned by the sheer madness of it, calling the Ark family utterly stupid. Michael doubted that the young man could hold his ground against that many guards, so the prince braced for the attack that was coming, and Michael muttered that the so-called hero clearly needed a lesson the hard way. He strode up to Vul and pressed her for her thoughts, and the prince swore that if she defected to his side, he'd make sure she got exactly what she needed. Suddenly, the girl came charging at the Absolute and latched onto him with a tight hug, shouting that she'd be his maid, and that her master would never fall behind Michael. The furious prince roared at her to vanish and die. He stared at both of them, then snapped, "I see everything." He snapped that the guards would kill them for daring to lift a hand against him, and that this was the story he'd swear was the truth. He roared at the guards to smash Absolute and Vul, and the guards yanked their swords free and charged straight at the heroes. Then bam, they got trapped in a dark surge of energy and their bodies went totally still, with their voices cut off and their hands refusing to move. Michael stared in confusion, then straight up froze as everything unfolded before him. The hero spun toward Vul and snapped, "Get help now." Then he pressed the truth into her, screaming that Prince Michael had lost his mind and ordered the guards to slaughter the Ark family's heir. All bolted from the room, sprinting straight for the exit. Every opponent got pinned in place, their weapons dropped to the ground, and they stayed tied up tight, totally locked down and unable to even make a sound. Absolute snapped around and slammed his blade aside with a razor-fast parry. With a single savage swing, he sliced through the guards and sent their hands flying. They stayed frozen in place, bound tight and helpless, and the young man snapped, reminding everyone he'd warned them, while the guards just stood there, trapped and unable to move. With a hard, steady voice, the protagonist warned, "I'm not repeating myself ever," and made it sound like a final strike. He hurled the spell, yanking everything back where it belonged, and the guards crumpled to the floor. Then Michael dropped into a chair, shaking like he'd just seen death itself, and he snapped his head toward Ark, utterly stunned by what he'd just done. Absolute lunged onto the table and demanded to know if it was really impossible to kill the heir of the highest nobility just because of someone's personal wish. Michael blurted that he just couldn't stand the guy. He'd heard that exact line a bunch of times already, and he leaned in and told the prince to say it again. The prince's fury erupted, his whole body trembling with rage. He snapped that the hero's stare, his every move, and even the fact that he existed drove him up the wall. Michael sneered, calling him an upstart, and the young man finally pushed himself up from the chair, like everything clicked into place, and the hero shot his hand up right in front of the prince's face. Absolute Ark blurted out that the prince tried to kill him, and he didn't need a crystal ball to know what was coming next, so he pressed, asking if his message had been heard loud and clear. The hero slammed the switch on King's Dominion ***, poured raw magic into his hands and drove it straight at the prince, while Michael's throat clenched, sweat drenched his body, and then, out of nowhere, the doors behind the hero exploded open and a scream tore through the air, barking that it had to stop right now. The king himself burst into the room and roared for both sides to drop their weapons right then and there. Absolute spun around, flashed a grin and faced the monarch, bowing to greet his majesty and asking how he was doing. The man blurted that everything had gone terribly wrong because the king himself showed up in person, and the hero instantly got suspicious about what the monarch was really up to. Absolute Arc sat across from his majesty and they tore into urgent matters, right there face to face. Michael flailed his arms and bellowed that the guards would execute the heroes for daring to raise weapons against him. Then he swore he'd make his story match exactly that version. At his order, the guards yanked their weapons free, buzzing with approval, while the king stood there watching it all with icy calm. Meanwhile, the Absolute played the monarch a full video of the whole disaster, showing exactly how the monarch handled the guards after it all went down. The king stared at the footage, baffled by what he was seeing. Meanwhile, the recording device kept snapping up every single detail of the scene. The protagonist confidently said he'd carefully recorded every moment, using some kind of magical artifact. His Majesty let out a heavy sigh, beads of sweat erupted on his face and he sank into deep, stormy thoughts. He whipped around, staring straight at the Absolute. He nodded with regret burning in his eyes, then asked for forgiveness for everything that went wrong. The young man made it crystal clear. The Arc clan had always backed the royal family, no matter what it cost, even if it meant dirtying their hands with blood to keep the country running, and he couldn't believe that their loyalty was rewarded with that kind of mercy. From behind, the boy stormed up to the king and snapped bitterly why he'd make a move like this. Then he warned that if this decision actually went through, the Arc family would have no choice but to rethink how they stood on royal authority. The king clenched in tense silence as the whole room held its breath, until the only thing that cut through it was the hero's smile. Sweat poured off his royal brow as he muttered that Michael was behind it all, then snapped on how no one would believe him, because he still couldn't wrap his mind around his own son doing something that vile. The monarch strode up to the guard and demanded answers. Was the punishment too harsh, and could the whole clash have been handled more peacefully instead? Absolute snapped back, saying the guards had already attacked a member of the high nobility, so from his side, this was nothing but self-defense. The guards ignored the warnings, so the blame was theirs alone. Now they had to fix Prince Michael's mistake, even if it meant dying for it, because this wasn't the boy's fault. The young man dropped into a chair, ready to plot his next move, then Wolves suddenly shuddered. The protagonist broke down, crystal clear, what the royal family plans to do to take responsibility for this mess. The king promised hefty compensation to the Absolute and his maid, then slammed Prince Michael under house arrest. The man balled up his fist and practically burst with excitement, asking if the hero would finally be satisfied with an offer like that. A high-ranking nobleman called for a call to arms, tried to muscle a servant into doing his bidding, and then went for the jugular with an attempted murder. Because of all of this, Michael would have earned life behind bars. Then the king jerked upright and started shouting outrage, and the Absolute demanded that Prince Michael be stripped of his heir title at the very least. King looked absolutely horrified. He flailed his hands, pleading for them to think of another plan, because Michael was his only son. If even one mistake happened, the royal dynasty would have collapsed for good, so the Absolute swore there was another way. Wool stared at him. The young guy just dropped the name of Princess Hannel. He figured that if she married a truly worthy man, everything would finally click into place. Didn't that beat the idea of leaving Michael stuck as crown prince? He couldn't help wondering. The king nodded, admitting Hannel really was more capable than Michael. Then he reminded her the girl was blind, so she couldn't possibly handle the job of ruling, and the monarch couldn't stop thinking about that young face. The protagonist nodded along, then snapped that if that's the plan, His Majesty and his advisors should take the reins and run the show. Absolute kept hammering his demands for compensation, plus the maid's share, and he demanded Michael be stripped of his inheritance rights. He made it crystal clear the final call, of course, belonged to His Majesty. The king erupted into a cold sweat and his expression turned brutally stern. The greenhouse stayed eerily calm and silent, and Will sat right in the middle, calmly sipping his tea. She felt her nerves buzzing, but the moment she thought about getting to snack on sweets, her excitement lit up like fireworks. She asked the gentleman if everything was truly fine, and he told her it was the king's compensation, so she could dive into those desserts and savor them to her heart's content. Will didn't know what to make of it, but the man patted her shoulder and told her to stop worrying. Suddenly, she mustered up the courage to ask why he was risking everything to protect her, and her voice trembled with one fear. If the prince decided to turn against them, it could spell disaster. The hero didn't dodge it, he confirmed her worst fears. Crossing the prince wasn't just trouble, it was basically calling down the wrath of the entire kingdom of Linen, and she shuddered like the danger had teeth. Even so, the young man kept going, saying the royal family had tried to seize wool that had pledged loyalty to them, and they did it with pure force. He slammed the name outrageous like it was a curse, and his fury roared louder with every word, remembering that the Ark clan had ruled these lands long before the kingdom of Lanana was even founded. No matter whose banners they wore, this whole territory was the Ark family's turf, so there was zero chance they'd hand their servants over to the royal crown. Val froze, stuck on what to say because the Absolute calmly told her she was just a maid serving the Ark family. Then he leaned in with a vow, since he was her master, protecting her was his job, so she had nothing to fear. The boy told her that the Ark clan is surrounded by enemies no matter what they do, and the hero promised her, straight to her face, that even with the kingdom closing in, he'll handle it. Absolute Ark didn't even blink, he already knew. He smirked. Val stared at him and a spark suddenly flared in her eyes. In that single moment, dark full moon nights came crashing back into her mind. They tore into her with shouts, claiming she'd been left behind, and spat that she was nothing but a weakling. Her own tribesmen jeered too, because in the wolf tribe, weakness wasn't just frowned on, it was a stain, even inside your own family. Strength wasn't a virtue there, it was the only thing worth being proud of. Val always felt swallowed by loneliness. She sank to the ground and cried like it hurt to breathe, because her weakness branded her as nothing but a servant, and even as a maid she couldn't measure up, so she carried her fate like a heartbreak she couldn't escape. She was given shelter, food, a real bed, and a warmth that felt like a promise, so the girl stood before the Lord and swore she'd protect him with her life on the line, no matter what it cost. The young man shot back, saying he wasn't so helpless that he needed anyone to pay for his safety. The very next day hit, and you could feel the kingdom's tension spiking in the air, straight up vibrating, while the head of state sat on the throne and his son Michael dropped to his knees before him. The king leaned in and demanded his son face the full weight of what he'd just done. The young man dropped his head and snapped, "The Absolute did this." He swore it struck first and said there was no option but to retaliate. The ruler pulled out a recording device and taunted Michael, asking if he'd dare say those same words again after watching the tape of what he'd done. The young man blurted out in stunned amazement, completely baffled that something like this could even happen. The king told everyone the recording came from the Absolute and that his own son had done the unthinkable. The air froze, then threw his hands up and yelled that it was the Absolute's fault. He accused the king of cowardice and swore that all the blame was on him. Michael said it was him who blew up his 10th anniversary reception, and then Michael ripped into him, shouting that was exactly why he planned to teach him a lesson. The king bowed his head and admitted, "I already warned my son, this mess came from the Duke's scheming, not from the Ark family." Turns out the Ark clan was the one getting crushed in all this, and the young man flat out said he wouldn't believe a single word of it, while the king hit back hard, declaring, no matter what, that his son had committed the crime. He whirled on Michael and declared that his crown prince status was being ripped away. Michael's body shook with pure terror. The king laid out the truth. Offenses like this usually land you in prison, so he'd better be thankful they weren't going that far. Michael burst into tears and demanded an explanation. Why should he refuse the position of heir? It felt completely absurd to him. The king told him, "If you show this footage to every noble and bow and apologize to the Absolute ruler, I'll seriously consider giving Michael back his place as the next heir." Then he warned that one move like that would crush the royal family's future, and the hero had to sit with what he'd done and carry that lesson into what came next. Right there, the talk cut off and the emperor snapped, ordering his son to leave. Fear crushed the boy's courage and he didn't know what move to make. Then the king roared at him, warning him not to dare ignore him. The young man shot up, begged for forgiveness, and clenched his fist like it could hold back fate. The room cleared out, but the monarch stayed planted on his throne, staring into space, because the truth hit him hard. His son was still shattered. He prayed Michael would grow up with time, yet he never thought it would spiral into this kind of raging madness. Now, the real crisis hit. Hanula's crown princess had to be appointed, and he had zero idea what to do. He started pacing the throne room, trapped in his own thoughts, seeing no escape at all while his trusted advisor hovered behind him. Suddenly, the monarch's eyes lit up with a wild idea. He asked the king to lock Hanul's engagement to the highest bidder. It hit the advisor like a thunderclap, and terror flooded him. The ruler kept laying out his logic and it clicked. Maybe this wasn't such a bad move. Backing Duke Zen, who supported Michael, would have meant picking a fight with a real enemy but going for better ties with the Arcs. That was riskier for the country. If they inched closer to the Arc family, they could win a huge wave of their support too, so the advisor told His Majesty to hold up for a moment while he weighed every single option. 5 years went by and the Arc family estate was still buzzing with non-stop activity. Right then, the battle exploded, steel clanged, and her sword whipped off to the side, hanging in midair like it refused to land. Maria Stella dropped her gaze over the man she'd knocked down. She was 20 years old, and rage-sad regret poured out of her as she admitted she couldn't keep pace with the hero lately. Maria admitted it stung a bit even if he was totally adorable. Then, bam, someone shouted from behind. It was Vul. He told her she was already in training and that she was being taught to fight. Vul was already 13 and she marched straight up to the Lord, demanding over and over permission to fight because she wanted it that badly. Then she stared forward and saw the hero waiting there. She snapped her gaze to the absolute 15 at the time and begged with everything she had. Even then, that kid, now all grown up, had become the kind of legend everyone around him couldn't stop admiring. As a villain, this was everything. He ended up sprawled in a huge, bright bathtub drowned in swirling steam because bathing was the perfect moment to grind through his big thoughts. Absolute Arc had kicked off and it was now 15. Lanana's chronicle was finally about to kick off her arrival at the capital's academy, but right then the steam room door cracked open just a sliver. It was Maria Stella. She spun toward the gentleman, offered her help, and wiped the grime from his back. The young man flashed a polite smile, then gently refused, insisting it wasn't necessary. The girl blinked in shock and demanded why he never handled it himself. He shot back that he'd already warned everyone, starting now, he was taking his baths alone. Maria snapped that she'd already decided to scrub his back, then eased into the warm water and steamy mist instantly wrapped everything around her. The girl said she had zero problem sharing a bath with Mr. Absolute. The hero stared at everything unfolding before him, and the whole situation felt wildly wrong. Maria Stella leaned in and said tomorrow was the day. The hero had been grinding toward it for so long. Then the guy just grinned and told her, "Don't stress, it'll all go perfectly." The girl rushed to reassure him, promising she'd handle everything and keep him safe, but he snapped back hard, telling her to back off and leave him alone. When their blades cross, the fight will decide the hero's fate and seal his enemy S2. Absolute's father leaned in and told him the real deal, how their family's magic works, summoning spirits. Then he pressed the question, "So you know the first head forged a bond with the Spirit King, right?" And the young man nodded, confirming he already knew. To truly master magic, the man swore he'd have to tear down a terrifying power, and then his son would have to live with a mark carved straight into his skin, and the father pointed to his own hand to prove it. The man made it clear he'd never let himself die for nothing, and his son would be forced to make a brutal choice, while the protagonist just went silent for what felt like forever, completely stuck on what to say. Suddenly he snapped his head up and told his father, "I've already made my choice, my mind's made up." Back then, this power would have killed the father before he even inherited it, because the Arc family had already paid in blood. The father pressed him, asking when they last fought, then pointed out it was back when his son was only 10. Tension cracked between father and son as they stared each other down in deadly silence. Suddenly, dark splashes slapped behind the family's head, then a black hole tore open behind him. A swarm of dark shadows swallowed the space, then surged forward at the man like a breaking wave. He snapped his wrist and with a swing of his weapon he blasted out black flame, then hurled the blade and watched it bite through the darkness, cutting the dark energies loose as they streaked straight toward him. Absolute's jaw dropped. He'd hit level 90 already, and in this world the average warrior was stuck around level 20. Hell, stories usually never show anyone past level 50 except Absolute, and his father's power was downright unreal. Staring at him, the hero realized one thing for sure: his father's power didn't just top the charts, it was beyond the 50th level. He whipped around and faced the Absolute, same choice his father made, because he had to admit the kid was strong. Still, the gap in hard-earned experience was massive, and yeah, this might sound a bit cruel. He geared up himself, barked that his time to strike had arrived, and they all snapped into fighting stances. His father lifted his sword straight toward his son's face, Then the kid snapped aside, swung his blade to block, and the two of them exploded into a brutal sword fight. The protagonist snapped backward and the father crashed into him a second later, getting flung back too. Then the man stared in shock, realizing his son had actually stopped that punch. The boy blinked in shock and stared forward because a fresh attack was already barreling toward him, so the man roared into a huge sword swing and the young fighter barely cleared it with a last-second, sky-high leap. He couldn't even process what was happening and his coordination slipped as shock hit him. Then the screams came back, the ones about him having to survive it because his father had started unleashing dark magic. The wall behind him started to crumble from the shock and the Absolute saw it happen, then just froze, stunned. When the attack finally stopped, the protagonist crumpled to the ground, stunned. He realized his father, the man who'd spent decades defending this country, had power beyond anything he imagined. Seeing the brutal holes torn into their estate walls, yeah, that strength was real. The man roared that everything was right on track and this was only the first move, while the boy stared at the situation and realized he had to push his power just a bit more. Suddenly, a blinding light tore through everything. He froze on the spot, and his father, completely lost, ended up in a stark white void and screamed in pure terror. Then the hero unleashed a chaotic storm of sword strikes, each one ringing out until it all detonated in a deafening explosion, and when the smoke cleared he had nothing left but to hurl one final swing at his opponent. Defeat and shock twisted the father's face, but they still kept brawling, casting magic even as they flew through the air. Then boom, another explosion ripped through, crashing part of the building's floor down. The father snapped his blade up to parry his son's strike, clean, precise, and deadly, and even then you could see exhaustion shake through his arms. Above him, the Absolute One stared him down, sizing every twitch up, while the young man beside it all trembled too. The family's head bellowed that his son had shot up into insane strength, then fixed his gaze on the Absolute as the young man stared back, speechless. He yanked himself away from his parent, and the world around them looked shattered beyond belief. Then his father started to lift himself up, slow and deliberate, while magic swarmed and gathered around him, and the hero had to decide his next move with everything they knew reduced to rubble. The Ark family's leader grabbed his hand with a deafening roar, screaming that this was their final moment and that they had to beat him. He shot that plea straight at the Absolute. He called the spirits to show up, then channeled the primordial spirit itself right as the father shot his hand forward and the magic surged, wrapping the entire room in a blazing veil. Right in front of the protagonist, a slender girl's legs suddenly materialized. She looked like she was asleep, eyes shut tight while a soft glow and steady energy poured off her. The girl snapped her eyes open and locked onto the boy, then the Absolute Arc tore into black hole magic, and a choking fog swallowed everything in an instant. After a while, the father and his son sat down in his office, trading every detail of what went down. The man demanded to know why he'd spared him, and he shot back that without death, magic couldn't be fully passed on, leaving the Absolute just staring, totally speechless. Staring out the window, he suddenly understood just how much his father had paid for this country, and then the question hit hard: if it's really about transmitting power, is his own life worth the price? He added that if this power only came by giving up your own parents, then it sounded like a victory with a poisoned taste, because the father didn't even know what to say. The Absolute stared back at the original story and realized death followed him around like a shadow, anything he swore he'd do to seize power, but the hero, he was cut from a totally different cloth. The father demanded, so what happens next? Because if he didn't die, the inheritance would never go through, and the protagonist just admitted he'd already been thinking about this. He marched up to his father and begged for permission to sign a contract with a summoned spirit, because without unique magic, he couldn't reign in any spirit unless he already had a deal with it, and he was ready to swallow that outcome. If they pull it off, the magic will leap to him the moment his father finally dies of old age. The man froze, thinking hard. Binding a contract with a powerful spirit demanded a mountain of magical energy, but even in his battered state he was already able to pull it off. The head of the Ark family warns, if you lose, you still carry out the winner's will. 3 of the 10 spirits summoned by magic were locked under the Spirit King's full control, and now the Absolute was about to seal a pact with one of them. He turned to his son and demanded, "You ready?" The kid nodded yes, stepped forward, stretched his hand out and focused all his power. A violent surge of energy ripped through the air, and right in front of him, a stunning woman manifested out of nowhere. He instantly knew it was a spirit of devotion, sworn to fuel her master's strength, widen their magical range, and smash their power even higher, completely faithful to the core. The protagonist leaned in and asked the girl her name, and the man snapped back with a warning. Spirits could understand them, yet in the human world they were robbed of the power to speak. The young man stared that terrifying thing down, stood his ground, and named it Toa. Then he told the Toa to shrink down, and the spirit girl obeyed without a fight, so he immediately praised her, and right after that his father addressed the Absolute. The family's head admitted it bluntly. His son hadn't fully mastered the power yet, but he still sealed a deal with a terrifyingly strong spirit. He said once the young man finished his academy training, he would surely rise to lead the art clan. Absolute pressed a hand to his chest, swallowed the words with pride, and promised he'd take that title with honor, then turned his gaze forward with fearless courage. Lanana's royal castle stood silent as a man shot out his hand, blurting that he never imagined they'd cross paths again. Then he let out a huge breath of relief, knowing the Ark family's head was still alive. The Ark family admitted it too. He'd barely clawed his way back from death. King clasped the Ark family head's hand in a powerful handshake. They slid into their seats, and the Ark leader snapped that after killing so many people, including his own father, he never thought he'd live this long. But the ruler cut him off and demanded he never speak like that again. He remembered how the Ark family had powered the country's rebuilding, and how the Ark leader wasn't just his childhood buddy but also his trusted ally. Then the king leaned in, stared at him like he'd been waiting forever, and made it clear how relieved he was to find him alive. He wished Michael would show off his strength in a duel. Then, right out of nowhere, a girl came from behind and started pouring tea. Even the king admitted it. Absolute power turned out stronger than his faith. And since Michael was tangled in his own complexes and prejudices, the ruler had basically zero hope they'd ever get along. The king leaned in and grilled the Ark leader, asking whether he'd ever even considered unleashing the Absolute annual engagement. The man burst into laughter, totally caught off guard and having no idea what to say back. The Archchief dropped the truth that he'd already planned to leave this world and somehow forgot to tell anyone. He bowed his head, apologized, then admitted he meant to pass it all to his son when the time came. The king just stared, totally stunned, while the Archchief finally confessed he was sick and tired of serving the country. He figured that once his son took charge of the family, he'd stop pushing so hard for the kingdom. Then that news absolutely stunned the ruler. But if the Absolute doesn't get paid what it's owed, its entire future will hang by a thread. Inside the Royal Academy of Lanana, the whole city buzzed with motion as carriage after carriage rolled in, and then one man yanked open the door and snapped, "Mr. Absolute." He nodded in full agreement. Then the hero strode across the academy grounds, surrounded by his friends and comrades like he owned the place. He shot a look upward. This boy had hauled everyone in close to grill them on the upcoming exams. Chris laid it out. Your tests would be writing, magic, and close combat. And after you finished, they'd sort you into classes A through D. He even promised you D rack up enough points without pulling focus from Mr. Absolute. And this year, everyone was waiting for Michael, the saint, and the hero to be welcomed with open arms because you just couldn't afford to stain the Absolute's good name. Chris whipped around to his master, declaring, "It's my turn." The Absolution's stern command snapped through the crowd, "Give everything you've got," and the people all nodded in perfect sync. The heroes pushed forward, then they spotted a saint waiting right in front of them, and Chris whispered to the master that the girl in the nun's robes was probably her. The moment she snapped her eyes open, the whole world lit up like fireflies in the dark. Chris froze, stunned by the insane aura blasting off her. The protagonist realized right away that she was the heroine from the original tale, and that's why every time the Absolute One crashed into the battles, she kept throwing restoration on the hero, patching him up again and again, while her stunning beauty and raw power sent the whole team's morale soaring. The young man couldn't stop thinking about St. Eliza. She felt just as deadly as the hero himself, and if she hadn't slipped out of the church yet, she had to be painfully naive. Before she even dared to think about the hero, Chris snapped around to the gentleman and demanded, "Is that the girl?" The gentleman nodded, and the girl admitted she'd come solo without her fiancé, her face tight with worry. Absolute tells him straight up, the hero's stuck taking the academy entrance exam, so he can't be there right now. The hero got a recommendation letter from the royal family as a gift, and the rumor was brutal. He was only half aristocrat, so the boy figured the girl, all wide-eyed and naive, was going to get crushed at the academy. The male leader snapped, calling every applicant to gather, because in moments they'd be thrown into a real fight paired off against opponents at random, all to prove they could master both swordsmanship and magic. The brawl would drag on until one fighter bilayed out of the ring, or the examiner cut the bout short, and that's exactly what they announced, so now it was just waiting for our names to get called. Cruel snapped her magic into the air, dead set on going toe-to-toe with her opponent. He clocked it and then snapped, realizing he couldn't get any closer while his friends stared at the whole thing in pure amazement. The boy couldn't do a thing against those brutal ice pillars that rose out of nowhere, so the girl stepped up, clenched her resolve, and called her magic back into existence. After training with Mr. Absolute, the lady went from strong to unstoppable. Her opponent roared and charged straight at him, but she kept her eyes locked on the Absolute, while he just smiled back at her. He knew this fight was already decided. The girl blasted through, then sent her opponent flying several meters back like it was nothing. The observer slammed the duel shut. Lady Cruel was declared the winner. Then the girl came sprinting to Mr. Absolute, screaming with pure joy that she was back, and he realized in that moment she'd gotten way more capable than before. She treated his praise like a crown, but instead of steadying her, it distracted her. Then embarrassment hit hard as she tried to fight through it. She confessed she went betrayed with embarrassment, then wished that gentleman good luck for his next fight. He thanked her, and Mr. Chris chimed in that the lady had worked her tail off, so Cruel froze, shocked that Mr. Chris was even here. A thick, bitter tension hung between them, and Absolute, standing right in the middle, could feel it buzzing in the air, loud as thunder. Cruel demanded to know who her opponent would be, then pressed her with names. Would it be Duke Kako, Marquis Marais, or Lady Alicia? Chris couldn't ignore the creepy possibility that the opponent could be a saint, but with those aristocrats mostly female, it screamed Duke Kako. Then the Absolute Arc was summoned straight into the arena. His friends wrapped him up in wishes for luck and swore they'd pray for him. The protagonist strode into the ring, scanning every possible threat, and Duke Kako, Prince Michael's party's infamous bully, loomed as the most dangerous name of them all. Tristan Kako had a reputation for being a gifted rebel, even inside his own family, but in the original story he barely showed up, so almost nobody knew who he really was. When his opponent finally stepped into the ring, his friends went wide-eyed, because the guy didn't even seem to realize what was happening. All four of them ended up in the ring at once, staring each other down like, so we're really doing this. Then Lisa, Alicia Marais, and Duke Kako popped into view at once. The young man bowed and greeted Miss Alicia, the Lady Saint, and the Duke of Absolute, then introduced himself as Tristan Kako, and the hero stared at him closely, thrown off and not sure what to say next. Tristan told them the examiner couldn't even say why everyone had left. The man kicked off his explanation. The rules say fights are one-on-one, but Lady Saint is built for support and her powers only hit their peak when she's paired up with someone. So they'll make an exception and run a 2-on-2 showdown right now, while the man locks in the lineup announcement. Alicia's guy had to go toe-to-toe with Tristan Kako and take on St. Eliza's threat too. Absolute was thrilled to get paired with Alicia. It felt like pure luck, the kind that never happens twice, and he realized that if he'd been matched with the Saint, he never would have had the chance to truly appreciate how strong he was. Alicia froze with fear as she stared at the hero, then slapped her cheeks hard, forced herself to breathe, and steeled her nerves. She threw her name into the air, Alicia Marais, and this was the very first time they'd ever met. The protagonist introduced himself right then, and the girl asked what their next move was. She could only cast spells and strike from range, and that whole plan finally clicked in the boy's mind. He commanded her to strike at Tristan until he reached her, and told her to leave him alone in the meantime. She snapped, asking if he was really sure, because the Saint can't fight, so didn't she just save him a spot in that Tristan brawl? The hero shook his head and said, even with the Saint backing me, I'd still have to do this alone, and beating him with 4 hands wouldn't be right. The Absolute Arc made it crystal clear. He refused to bury enemies under sheer numbers. He wanted the fight split up, roll by roll, and crushed one-on-one, and then Alicia's eyes suddenly blazed with excitement. She marched up to the hero and threw him an apology, confessing she'd totally misread him, and saying an aristocrat like her had no business acting so reckless. She chose to follow his plan and charge in with honor blazing in her heart. The hero demanded to know if she understood she was on the hook for the Saint. She burst into laughter and nodded like it was obvious. Then they finally faced each other eye to eye and the battle exploded. The fight ignited, Tristan Keiko lunged forward, blade in hand, while the girl snapped her magic into place, hurling a fireball straight at the enemy closing in. Keiko spun around to the woman behind him and snapped that it was her turn now. She shut her eyes, nodded, and kicked in with her powers: support, protection, and self-healing. A massive explosion roared out, but somehow not a single thing got damaged. Alicia erupted in joy, sure her scorching projectile had landed on her enemy, but the moment the smoke rolled in, the protagonist knew the truth. Thick, choking smoke swallowed the ring. The enemy didn't even slow. He barreled forward at full speed, bruises all over his body, yet he was still grinning. Alicia's head spun with confusion, but she kept hurling projectiles. She could tell every hit landed, yet her target still refused to stop. The hero locked in, piecing it all together. She just triggered her fear-nullifying skill. Panic started to creep in as he tried to guess how this fight would land. Then the saint flashed a grim smile. The girl lunged to pin her opponent down, but he never slowed. Like magic slid right off him, and the young man watching from the sidelines stared in awe at St. Eliza's skill, certain he could move without fear. At that exact moment, the opponent got slammed backward. The girl's eyes went wide and the young man snapped into action. He couldn't let the entrance exams slip, not now. He yanked his sword by the hilt, and this time it was his turn to fight. The opponent lit up with pure delight because the glorious moment was finally here, while the hero had already tossed his scabbard aside. The boy grinned and blurted that he'd heard non-stop about this guy and his unreal talent. Then right away, it lit a fire under his opponent's curiosity to step up and challenge the hero. The young man didn't even show his joy. He stayed stone calm. But inside, it thrilled him to no end because his dream was finally unfolding, and that day felt absolutely perfect to him. The enemy's face curled into a sinister grin, like he was savoring the moment the young man couldn't wait for. He burst into the fight and kicked off the duel, but the hero just stood there with a calm face and told him straight up that he'd talked way too much. Their blades slammed together with a thunderous clang, and the hero locked in, eyes sharp, mind set, ready to win this fight. The enemy was reveling in every hit on the absolute. Her friend watched with bated breath, and the saint clasped her hands tight, praying like her life depended on it. The opponent kept pounding him, yapping that he'd burned through all his energy already. In the next heartbeat, he slashed with everything he had, and the blade nearly kissed the hero's face. Absolute snapped to the truth. His enemy wasn't some easy target at all, and he'd clearly studied a bunch of sword styles. As the young man parried the strike, he sent his opponent flying back, and somehow a smug smile still tugged at his lips. He couldn't help grinning that the hero finally managed to last this long against him. This had to be the best day of his opponent's life. Then the boy goes and drops the idea, what if we turn our fight into an anniversary? Absolute's anger flared up fast. He had no clue what the man was even saying. The girl shut her eyes tight, brimming with nerves, while the young man only gave a small, crooked smile. The enemy launched another assault, firing off one furious question: why hadn't the hero teamed up with Alicia when together they could have had them beat? Arc deflected the strike once more, then shoved his opponent back hard. Even with the saints backing him up, the hero shot back that his opponent was still slugging it out solo, and that taking him on 2 against 1 felt like going down to the basics. That unshakable statement hit him so hard he burst out laughing. He squared up to strike again, sure the young man's power was undeniable. The boy came barreling at his opponent, daring him to stop hiding behind nobility if he lost, and then the hero met the hit head-on with his sword. Alicia grinned as she watched the fight unfold, practically buzzing with delight. She clocked that Tristan, bred in a martial arts legacy, was freakishly strong, and she figured the saint's backing had something to do with it. Either way, Kako had already taken the hero head-on and won. She couldn't stop worrying if Arc even had a shot at winning. The guy surged forward with unstoppable confidence, and right as he pressed in, the smile vanished from Tristan's face. The girl's jaw dropped at his razor-sharp sword skills. Kako got launched backward, and he slammed his sword into the ground just in time to steady himself. Confusion hit his face like a wave, and he couldn't wrap his mind around how this even happened. Then he remembered St. Eliza. She caught on to his struggle and stepped in to help. Then she placed a saint's blessing on the young man, and boom, his strength surged back. He turned to her and thanked her right then. Power surged through him, and the opponent snapped back into another brutal attack. He rained punches on Arc, but somehow the hero didn't even look rattled. The boy clocked it right away. Even with more strength and speed, nothing else had changed, and Tristan still couldn't adapt to his new power. That left our hero with zero options left, nowhere to run, nothing else to do. The young man couldn't stop himself. He had to figure out just how far that opposing team's power really went. Body enhancement magic isn't deadly on its own, but if they stack it too high, things can start to go badly fast. Eliza's skill snapped the fear out of him so fast it showed right there on his face. Ark suddenly clocked how his opponent went oddly silent. The hero finally clocked everything he needed to see, and then, no more hesitation, he decided it was time to end it all. He swung the blade again, and blasted Tristan straight into the wall. Blood burst from Kako's mouth right after the hit, and everyone froze, staring in shock at what the Absolute's attack left behind. The hero called out that his opponent was a truly dangerous swordsman, just missing that last bit of precision. He promised that next time, it's no games, real one-on-one at the academy. Kako figured the hero didn't hate him at all, he just pitied him because he still had something left to chase. Suddenly a voice cut through the air. He whipped around to face the saint, but she just lifted her hands. Then Ark and Murai were crowned champions, and victory was officially theirs. The girl watched the young man walk away, her heart screaming to stop him, yet fear froze her in place. Doubt chewed at her from the inside, screaming at her to decide what she should do next. When she replayed that old competition in her mind, she never could have guessed the young man would turn out this freakishly strong. Alicia clenched her chest, terrified of what would happen if the Absolute truly squared off against the man who'd vowed, out of pure hatred, to wipe out her entire family, and tears burned at the corners of her eyes. This was the nightmare she'd been begging not to become real. As soon as she got home, she couldn't wait to sit down with her fiancé and finally talk. At the Archive estate, the guests laughed and traded stories while our hero leaned on the balcony with a drink in his hand, flanked by a whole crowd of friends. He praised their efforts, saying every last one of them had trained like crazy and poured their hearts into it, and the boys nearly burst with pride, because right then they were about to step into the academy, where people swore status didn't matter, but come on, that was just a formality, and deep down, status still ruled everything. So the hero rallied everyone and demanded they prove the Ark House stands as one. Everyone in the town despised the estate's members because they called themselves nobles, but all that money came from dirtying their hands with blood like villains through and through. Absolute had zero doubt, since everyone in their circle already had that opinion. They just needed to show up and match the expectations. But he knew his family's work was saving lives, and pride surged through his chest. But this time it wasn't just a problem, it was a gut punch, because worry and rage twisted him up over how openly others mocked them. Every one of them grimaced at the hero's words, but he kept going, convinced those people were nothing but arrogant. The boy kept pushing his request to prove how united his home was, and the other boys were instantly blown away. Determination surged through all of them. The young man snapped and reminded them they weren't those easy weaklings to laugh at anymore. Now it was time to prove their strength. The heroes truly believed the weak evil would get crushed by the strong who insisted they were right, so they decided to team up and stomp it out together. They pledged unwavering loyalty to the boys, swearing they'd always stand by their side, and as members of the Ark faction, they were meant to feel proud of being labeled evil. Then he shoved the gauntlet at them and dared them to prove just how proud they really were. With the start finally set, Ark rallied the whole crew and they blasted off on their journey. This Absolute shoved his briefcase shut, told everyone he was leaving, and insisted there had to be an entrance ceremony first. He begged Willimaria to handle the unpacking for him. Linana steps into the Royal Academy with him, Morima right by his side, and the girls say yes instantly, no questions asked. The carriage rolled up to the main entrance, and the moment it stopped, every other student instantly clocked it. With total confidence, Absolute and his friends charged ahead, fearless and locked in. The Academy students blinked in shock, because the Ark family faction was packed with high-ranking aristocrats left and right. Right there in the mix were even Eurus and Lady Cruella. Whispers tore through society, people swore the Ark family ran a truly rotten operation. The moment those new faction members burst in and the pressure hit, it was obvious, the rumors weren't rumors at all. Ark sprinted toward the Academy entrance, convinced that out there, just like anywhere, first impressions could make or break everything. The boy realized he couldn't let his guard down for even a second. He had to stay on top of everything, because that was the only way he could protect his subordinates. With Absolute sitting on undeniable power, the Ark's family had to prove they were united, and he knew his whole job depended on it. That wild, outgoing pressure hit Ark, his friends, and all the students, and everyone jolted and shuddered. The kids knew better than to come near them, some even refused to share a classroom with them, yet a few still looked at Lady Cruella and thought she was drop-dead gorgeous. Earlier, a rumor was flying around. Someone had already tried to get close to the girl and Ark nearly killed him. The young man carried one burning mission in his heart: make everyone remember the Ark family and remember the absolute ruler who leads them. The young man shook with fear as he approached his friends who were sitting on chairs, and he blurted that he was supposed to help them but somehow landed in Class B. Then Chris's hand clamped on his shoulder and told him, "Don't worry." The girl beamed at him and begged him to trust the hero's help, promising she'd handle every last thing. The young man leaned in and asked about Orion and Mistu in Class A, then turned around and hyped every single boy for absolutely crushing it. Rouse thought it all came down to the hero's training, because without it he could barely even make it into the sea on his own. Arko's patience snapped as Mistu kept showering him with flattery, and he demanded point-blank that it stop. The moment the professor stepped into the classroom, the students burst into applause, and when he greeted them he didn't just smile, he congratulated them for earning their admission. In Linen, if you were an aristocrat you got marched into the academy at 15, and for the next 3 years you were put through training that shaped you for everything ahead. Even more than aristocrats, the academy let in kids of famous merchants and those the church vouched for, and if a commoner had a powerful aristocrat backing them they could slip in too. At the end of the day, it all came down to status and grades. Meanwhile, the professor handed the mic to the first-year rep, Michael Lanning, and this young guy wasted no time. He thanked the director and every member of the faculty for their heartfelt welcome. He swore that the people of Linana would rise to the level the teachers could be proud of, and that they'd keep growing, learning, and leveling up. He dreamed of becoming close comrades, teaming up to protect their country, getting stronger, and never letting evil win. And when he finally spoke his last words, Ark's gaze snapped cold and hard. Michael pumped up his classmates, urging them to team up and grind their studies for the next 3 years. But when the hero listened closely, he realized the student meant something else. She wasn't just talking to talk. She wanted to rally her comrades at the academy, crush the absolute, and claw her way back to the throne as crown prince. Even after they ripped his title away, it still wasn't enough to satisfy the fury boiling inside him. The prince still had a whole lineup of plot bombs waiting ahead, and Ark knew, yeah, he was seconds away from meeting his absolute best version. But the young man kept grinning, sure that in the end, only the absolute Ark would still stand. Once a while passed, Ark finally hit the road, because even though he'd promised it earlier, the real chaos was about to start and he needed to be ready. The boy couldn't afford to lose. He knew the plan couldn't play out the way it was meant to, and right then, the maids climbed into the carriage and cut through his thoughts. The young man threw out an apology for being so thoughtful, then quickly assured them he was totally fine, even if his nervous look betrayed him. Then he snapped at the maids and ordered them to ride with him to the academy and back, plus prep dinner afterward. So the girls had to act properly. When that young man asked if everything was clear, they nodded fast and promised, "Yes, sir." Ark depended completely on the maids. The hero rolled up to the academy with an escort, and just as his friends were there waiting, Cruella swooped in and greeted him with a bright "good morning." He told the maids to stay right by the entrance and ordered them to wait in the waiting room until lunchtime. Wool stared at the academy building in disbelief. It was massive, packed wall-to-wall with people. Her friend lit up at her reaction like she'd snapped right back to her old self, and when the woman couldn't stand seeing her colleagues' dejected faces, she stepped in and straightened everything out. Wool figured that when her masters built things she had to be flawless, and she wanted to grow up like her companion too, just not all the way. The maid clapped both hands over her mouth, trembling with emotion. She was sure Mr. Absolute was already smitten with that girl. She leaned in and assured Wool with a grin, telling her she'd already been doing an amazing job. Suddenly, the young man blurted out to the girl. He snapped, realizing that the maid was the exact same fighter from that tournament. She spun around and stared at the young man, and right then their eyes locked. The girl narrowed her eyes, moved out of the way, and demanded, "Who is that guy?" Wool didn't wait for a reply. She spun around and hurried off, apologizing mid-stride because she had work to do, while the young man just froze, utterly stunned and lost. He lunged to stop her again and reach her, but he couldn't. Maria swatted his hand aside. She seethed at the idea of him touching a servant from another house, calling it a total breach of decency. And then the maid snapped, asking the young man whether he knew they belonged to the Ark family. He jerked in shock as her grip clamped down hard on his hand, squeezing it tight like she meant business. He tried to play it off like he just wanted to talk to the girl, but Wool snapped and decided they should blame her instead. The girl pushed her way out of the crowd and demanded everyone stop what they were doing. Alicia said he was one of her people, and the second she heard that, her curiosity kicked into overdrive about what really happened. Maria felt steam rise in her chest the moment that girl slid up to them because she just couldn't stand people like that. Meanwhile, Alicia scooted the young man onto her lap and promised she'd talk to him, right then and there. Then the girl leaned in and asked which house the servants belonged to, determined to make things right with their master. She kicked things off by introducing herself in the art, and the maids immediately followed suit. Then they bowed and told her they served the Ark house. Maria and Vol dipped their heads and swore they'd tell their master everything that happened, while Alicia nearly choked on horror when she heard where their new acquaintances really came from. Art was stunned to learn about the Absolute family, and he couldn't stop lamenting why all of this was happening to him. The students piled into the academy's giant training field, and Alicia quickly clocked how huge it was, yet the Absolute still hadn't shown up. So the instructors herded everyone into the hall. Art was gripped in the hands of two girls, while his friend begged him to calm down. She'd heard what this young man was like, but she couldn't figure out why she was stuck dealing with it. She just knew her father was going to tear into her again. Alicia, stop and listen. Those Ark family faction guys just stormed into the room. The guys barely cracked a smile when they saw them. Some froze the moment the hero showed up, and others just straight up backed away, terror written all over their faces. Cruella started snapping at Ark, grilling him about how exhausting it is to stay popular. Then Ark just shrugged because they were all right there with him. Mr. let it slide for not taking things too seriously, but one of them was furious that they'd been treated badly from the very beginning and even pushed for them to leave, while Absolute just weighed it all up and let the rude people do the damage. The students stared at the hero in silence, and the hero shot back with a sour question. What were they gawking at, and did they seriously think they were hunting for death? His words ripped through the students like a cold shock, and pure fear hit them all at once. The moment the hero showed up, Alicia felt the whole atmosphere snap into something darker and heavier. Suddenly, she spotted Art sprinting alongside her, yanked his arms and stopped him cold, like the young man was seconds away from leaping straight into flames. Absolute couldn't wait to test how many hits the former prince could take, but his friend grabbed his attention and warned him not to kick off a fight right at the start. The professor had everyone's eyes on him, freshly enrolled students who were already getting loud and rowdy, and he just loved the spark in that chaos. Teach Toto stepped forward and introduced himself, and in Class A he was the one calling the shots. He figured they'd all turned into classmates and wanted to get to know each other, but locking eyes at someone like that was straight-up disrespect. Seeing how the students' interest exploded, the teacher seized the moment and offered the place up for training fights. He realized the boys were dying to test their strengths, so this was the perfect chance to get to know each other. First, they had to split up. The man pressed his finger to his chin, stared down his thoughts for a beat, and then declared he would assign Art in Absolute to his opponents. Alicia couldn't wrap her head around what the professor was saying. It hit her like a punch to the gut. And the teacher decided to kick things off with only the two of them. The girl snapped, "Don't make stupid moves, your opponent is Ark." She spun toward him, but the boy was already gone, talking to some other student. Alicia saw those smiling faces and immediately asked, "So what are you all doing here? Are you here for the art?" The professor called out to the young man, because the hero was already there, waiting for him. The young man scrambled to apologize for the delay since this was their first real chat. Then he introduced himself, only for the Absolute to already know exactly who he was. Art clocked it instantly. His opponent was basically brushing him off, and that felt dead wrong. He told the hero, "I don't know much about you, but I've been lucky to face you this fast." And before the young man could breathe, he pushed, "All right, let's get to the point." The Baron laid down his terms. If he won the duel, could Ark finally stop wrecking the world with his evil deeds? He was fully aware of his family's ties to the dark organization, and on top of that, he couldn't stand how that young noble treated the Beastman girl like trash. Alicia's blood ran cold at the words her fiancé was spitting out. But the guy kept pushing his point. If he lost, he'd straight up admit he was wrong without excuses, because Absolute had absolutely no clue what the other guy was even talking about. Still, Art dug in and pushed his plan hard, trying to shove the hero into ignoring people's worth instead of looking down on them. He hurled himself forward, swung hard, and barreled straight at his opponent. Todo was absolutely furious. He hadn't granted permission for them to start. The man stepped in front of Art and stopped him cold. Calling a classmate a criminal is unforgivable, so he told him to back off. The young man ignored the professor and shoved him aside, knocking him out of the way. Then he unleashed the hero's true Holy Surge attack, an evil-destroying blast that tore through Arc. After he slammed the enemy, the guy shouted to everyone that it was a holy magic move made to wipe out villains, so if it worked on them, it was about to hit the hero too. Suddenly, a voice cut through the chaos. Absolute snapped himself back up after the fall and parried Art with his own words. Alicia couldn't believe the young man actually survived that holy attack, while the friends shook with fear for their master. The Arc faction erupted in fury when Absolute got hit, and even from behind, Art was forced to be stopped. They'd already boxed the boy in, but the hero stepped in and cut them off because this mess was his fault. And what really felt off, the whole crew wanted to swarm one enemy all at once. Rage burned through him. He couldn't stop imagining everyone saw him as so pathetic they'd de-swarm him and attack him in a packed crowd. Art spat out his displeasure, admitting his opponent was clearly better, but he still believed the holy attack would land. The young man snapped back into the fight, this time brandishing a holy sword and charging headfirst. No sooner did the young man reach for the weapon than Arc came barreling in and smashed him in the stomach with his fist, faster than he could react, too slow, and the hero got caught. That hit blasted the young man straight into the wall, and the moment it landed, he turned away in disgust, thinking his opponent just didn't have the talent and should have trained harder with a sword. Art's voice came from right behind him, and there the guy was smeared in blood, yet he grinned and insisted like it was the truth that none of it mattered. The young man had zero plans to lose, because so many people in that country were already bleeding under the Arc family. He felt it in his bones. His duty was to save every single one of them. So he shoved himself back up, then charged straight at the enemy again. But this time too, the Absolute outpaced him, and the hero lunged from behind, shattering his bones. When Alicia saw R2 deteriorating, she clapped both hands over her mouth in pure horror. The young man crashed to the ground, then snapped his angry eyes up at the hero when he called him a weakling. The aristocrat leaned back and basically said, "My opponent's all noise, no muscle to back it up." And even with the hero skills people claimed he had, Art was really just a weak little pushy guy, barking about his rights like that would somehow make him strong. But the young man didn't buy it for a second. He swore he'd crush the evil inside Arc and save her with his own hands. The Absolute confirmed his words. He's evil, the worst in the country, and he even promised to meet up with this so-called ally of justice. Alicia collapsed into unconsciousness, the professor crumpled from the Art's blow, and the young man himself took wounds too, while St. Eliza just stayed silent. The hero loomed over his defeated rival, convinced that ending his life would finally save everyone. Arc was sure his own death wouldn't change a thing. Another evil would simply step in to take his place. The boy spun toward the faction's nobles and ordered the lady to fetch the other teachers and lay it all out for them. While Mistu grabbed the hero and tied him to a pole, Oriana watched like a hawk to make sure he couldn't slip free, and the moment anyone saw a weird twitch, they swarmed in and hit hard right away. Everyone sprang into action. Eliza sprinted to the wounded man and wasted no time. She started healing him right away. After a while, the young man finally went to Eliza and grilled her, sure she was the one who'd driven him to act that way. The saint stayed stone calm, stunned by what he said, while she shot back that she'd never done anything like that. Alicia sucked in a shaky breath as reality crashed back in, then she realized with dread twisting her gut that it wasn't a dream at all. The student fidgeted and asked if everything was okay, and the girl thanked her for worrying and told her it was all fine, while secretly praying it was just a nightmare. Art hurled a public insult at an Arc family member, and it all happened before the battle, right when it was about to spell disaster for the young man. Alice still had to apologize to the maid, and this time she couldn't fake it. She had to be completely sincere. She peeked around the corner and froze. There it was, Absolute. But then she glanced over, and there was St. Elsa standing right beside him. She tried to catch every word of their conversation, but it all slipped right through her fingers. Then she caught Arc pressing the saint for answers, grilling her about whether she'd used her skill to make the young man aggressive, so she feigned total ignorance. Alicia went pale when she realized they weren't just talking about anything, they were talking about her friend. She was convinced the Absolute was plotting to join forces with the church, then erase her family and their art from the world. Suddenly, the hero and his companion spotted her perched behind the wall, listening in like she couldn't resist the secret. The young man frowned at her in disgust, then turned his back and walked off. The moment he locked eyes on her, a cold chill crawled over her skin like ice. The young man and her escort stormed off before she could even get one word in to apologize. Ark and his friends sat down at the dinner table and the boy stared in disbelief, because somehow that gentleman had actually knocked the hero flat. Cruella practically shouted that he pulled it off with nothing, no sword, no magic, just his bare hands, and she couldn't even process what she was seeing. Oriana nodded along and the girl's jaw practically dropped. She was just as stunned as her. This young guy was crushed, burning with envy and itching to see the fight with his own eyes, so Mr. jumped in, backed his friend up, told him to train even harder and promised that next year he'd land in the same class as his master. Maria hurried up to the hero with the news that Alicia from the Murai family wanted to meet him, and the maid even asked if he had any objections. Then the gentleman shut it down cold, refusing outright and ordering her to tell Alicia he had zero intention of talking to her family and that he'd deal with her later. The maid dropped even more secrets. Art had just shattered Vool's peace and the absolute gaze suddenly went cold, but no matter what, he still couldn't make sense of what was so messed up about that guy. Maria pitched the idea of a cozy cafe stop after they left the academy, and the young man immediately agreed. It sounded perfect. The maid swore she'd deliver his message straight to Alicia. Will tore into that cake, grinning ear to ear, and then she thanked the hero with pure, sparkling joy. He told her, "Go on, help yourself," then took a bite himself and instantly lit up at the mind-blowing taste of Mont Blanc. The hero had hated this treat before, because the Absolute had been messing with him so hard. He caught Maria staring at him and demanded to know what that look meant, even threatening to make her stop. Then she just murmured an apology and nothing more. It was the first time she'd ever seen that gentleman dig in with such pure joy, and that's exactly why the maid leaned in and suggested they start serving dessert across the mansion. He refused it flat out. He only wanted to nibble it sometimes because that cake was absolutely mouthwatering. Still, you'd better eat it before death snatches you away. Ark cornered Wool and grilled him about that recent run-in with the hero, just to make sure nothing else had gone wrong. The girl snapped back into the memory and rage started to flood her, and when the guy kept acting like he knew her, hostility shot straight into her chest. Then she told him that Maria had defended her, and Ark blinked in shock because the girl was actually crushed by that meeting with a young man. Still, Ark remembered how clueless main characters can be, like they can't even read personal space. Honestly, it was kind of pathetic. The Absolute shot a reminder straight at the maids, everything he'd already said. "If I'm not here, you protect yourselves, that's why I gave you this power." The maids nodded with full confidence. Father didn't hate the idea of Ark talking to the Murai family, but the way it was heading made him nervous. It looked like a compromise was on the way, and that could hurt the Murai, even toughening the outer walls of the Arklands. Still, stronger walls would also mean the aristocrats nearby would start meddling. Then Absolute stepped in and calmly said he'd already gotten the royal family's approval, so Father should worry about nothing. He knew an apology was both necessary and unavoidable, so he demanded Alicia's family be brutally sincere. Then everything detonated when the royal family stepped in and stopped the hero's execution, and that disaster turned into his problem to fix, and he was already charging straight for that direction. The man nodded and told the boy to take charge, do what he thought was right. He told his son not to give those people any sympathy, because if the Murai family had focused on raising the hero from the start, none of this would have ever happened. The young man was sure he'd win, because real evil never shows mercy. The maid burst into the room and blurted that the Murai family had arrived. Backed by the king, the royalists drew their swords against a different kind of danger, too much power in one royal grip, so they pushed to hand that control to the nobility instead, while the neutral factions slid in between, keeping everything from tipping over. The Murai family sat in the guest hall, their marquee flying as staunch royalists, while Ark realized the hero and Alicia's marriage was basically sealed, and that his growing influence in the faction gave him the perfect shot to cut Art loose from his family. He barged into the hall and spotted two Murai representatives waiting there. The guests bowed to their hosts, and the young man swept them with a sharp, judging gaze. He clocked the Murai marquis in seconds, and even with no saint in the room, his crumbling education was a brutal handicap. The hero dropped into a seat and told the visitors to copy him. Then the girl looked sick with disgust, and the boy even swore the man was trying to dump all the blame on her. The Marquis kicked things off by apologizing to the Absolute for the sheer stupidity the hero just pulled. He couldn't stomach what he saw, there was no forgiving it. But Art refused to repent, because that would have sparked even more trouble, so he got placed under house arrest. Even with the young man wearing the hero label, the boy was convinced he'd crossed the line and committed a crime, and Ark wasn't letting it slide. So he turned to the Marquis and demanded to know what he'd been drilling into his protege this whole time. The young man snapped that the quote hero labeled him a criminal with zero proof, and now he's convinced the rumor started in the Mary family, so fear hit him hard and he started denying everything. He tried to swear he'd never taught the boy a thing like that, then reality hit. In their family, Art's upbringing was handed to the Marquis's own daughter, Alicia, not him. His worst suspicions hit the nail on the head and he felt his trust shatter completely, while the father snapped and struck the girl, blaming her for ruining everything. The daughter tried to apologize, but the Marquis snapped back that sorry wouldn't cut it. Then the hero's icy voice cut in, commanding him to shut up. The boy shot Marquis Marais a question: did he remember where he was? Because if that public act kept going, Ark was coming for his life. He snapped out of it in a heartbeat, and quickly threw out an apology for how he'd acted. The young man told him the Art family had only 3 rules: get a magic stone to fix the outer wall, cough up 2 billion in compensation with the Murray family and the hero, and make Art pay half the cost himself or he'd be kicked out of his studies. Then they'd also have to end their engagement with Alicia. The Marquis froze at the terms, the sun absolutely blew everyone away, and then the king himself nodded through the hero's marriage to his daughter. Ark realized the Art could have gone sideways the whole time, but it was the royal family's interference that hauled everything this far. And if they forked over the full compensation, the engagement could be ended right away, so the young man figured these terms were surprisingly generous. And he declared that Marquis Marais would be marched straight to the king. His thoughts froze on one silent question, then the young man snapped that it was a royal order. Her father jolted up from his seat, stunned that the king had summoned him, because in his mind it was all Alicia's fault. Ark leaned in and demanded, "Why do you think that?" Because he knew damn well he was the Marquis. The young man spoke straight up about the man's plan: dump every last responsibility onto his daughter. And the kicker was this: at first, raising a hero was the Marquis's job. So all the blame landed on the Marquis of the Murray family, and the king leaned in, ready to hear his excuse. When the verdict hit, the man started to shake uncontrollably. The young man begged his father to send the guest away, while the girl stayed seated, hands shaking hard like her whole world was breaking inside her. Right then, the conversation snapped shut. Ark realized he'd steamrolled Murray with demands all on his own. Ark told them the letter and the notarized document would roll in from the royal family, but not just yet. Alicia's father is about to get stripped of his role as head of the family. She threw out a sincere apology, insisting she hadn't pushed hard enough and saying she'd only dragged everyone into trouble, completely sure the whole disaster was her fault. Art felt a savage, inexplicable hostility rise up, shattered the calm of the Ark families he'd built, got branded Absolute as a criminal, and then he lunged at the teacher. The girl rose from her seat and once more admitted her guilt. Yet torment crushed her because it meant all of this pain was landing only on her. Tears burned in her eyes. She knew she'd done nothing wrong, but every time her ward acted weird, the blame snapped onto her and anger came down hard. Alicia couldn't tell if it was her fault. Things spiraled into a full-on war between the families. She knew it was pointless. Anyone this strong and arrogant like that would never bend the knee to her. Alicia burst into tears, crushed by the regret that she'd never be able to pull off something like that. The girl tried to apologize to Ark, because he was the one who got hurt and she had no right to throw a fit in his house. Then she spotted the young man closing in on her. Suddenly he snatched Alicia's hand, and she stared at him, completely baffled. Then she felt pure healing magic slam into her body, washing away the pain. They stayed locked side by side, staring straight into each other's eyes like nothing else mattered. The hero backed him up, dead certain she wasn't at fault, because the real blame sat on Art's own shoulders and the girl's father too, for failing his duties completely and leaving everything in ruin. She fought tooth and nail to sway him, insisting it wasn't his fault at all, because he was the one getting hurt, the real victim. The boy thought, if I crank up the power enough, the hero won't dare lift a finger. so the Absolute had to unleash its full strength, loud, clear, and so obvious even a fool couldn't miss it. That's why Alicia could end up hating him. She shot him another confused look, and the young man broke it down in way more detail. Then she could dump all the blame on him and finally breathe easy. The young man branded himself the country's evil, so why waste rage or resentment on anyone else? None of it mattered except the way he turned it inward, because honestly it would have been better if everyone pointed the blame at him for what happened. Guests flashed smiles and thanked him, but they still chose to sit this one out. She even joked that Ark hadn't done a thing wrong, then said they should hit Ark instead of him. She felt like an absolute idiot lugging everything solo because no matter what she tried, nothing went the way she planned. Now she finally got it, those young guys near him weren't just fans, they were absolutely obsessed. And to her shock, Absolute turned out to be a genuinely good guy, so much so that the poor man nearly choked on his own disbelief, convinced she'd totally lost her mind. Then he leaned in and asked Mirai if she'd team up with him and form an alliance. The guest didn't get his question at all, and panic started creeping in fast. Ark made it simple. He offered to walk away from Mariah's family and leave the hero too if she said yes, and then they'd lock it in with a marriage contract for convenience. The young man shot his hand toward her, begging her to take it, so Alicia reached out and grabbed on. Later, back at the Mary family home, the girl snapped her engagement to Art and ended it for good, so now he'd have to cough up a staggering $1 billion in compensation, and he'd be forced to drop out of the academy for that whole stretch. He leaned in and asked, "So, do you have anything to say?" He clenched his fists and begged his ex-fiancée for forgiveness, scrambling to explain himself right when something weird snapped into place. His body drifted like a ghost, his mind warped into something unreal, then pure rapture hit him hard, shredding every last ounce of reason until it vanished. Art snapped, he couldn't hold it in anymore. Alicia froze, was that guy really swallowing some shady medication? Then he snapped the claim down hard, saying it wasn't true, and the hero made it clear he wasn't about to start trouble with the Absolute because he'd already said he was gathering supporters. The young man couldn't shake the feeling that the arch-faction was definitely hiding something. After hearing his speech, the girl felt crushed, because sure, everyone labeled Ark a villain, but unlike the hero, he actually treated the competition like it mattered and you could see the pride in him. She burst into yelling because if the Art kept insulting him, Alicia swore she wouldn't forgive it. Even now, the kid still saw him as a villain, and somehow in his gut, only one person could make it happen. Muir shot him down. If the Ark family had done evil, then the country had to face it because this wasn't something they could handle alone, and a hero's power shouldn't get used for selfish reasons. The girl leaned in and asked the young man if he truly knew what it feels like to be wounded. Art just couldn't find the words. From this day on, he had to kick out of home, prove himself as an adventurer and make things right, because now this was his shot to use his art to help the country, not just as a nobody but with a brand new rank. She rose on the spot and bolted for the exit, declaring that this was his atonement. The young man pushed to talk to her, but Mariah shut the door on the conversation and told him to leave. Then Art squeezed his fist until it ached, apologizing again to his ex-fiancée. As they split, the guy told her to take care of herself, then he was gone. The moment he left, she stretched out in pure relief. She didn't hate him, not even close, but she sure didn't love him either. To her, the hero felt like a nagging little brother, and finally, now she could breathe easy. From this day on, the royal family will watch his every move, and if he messes up, it won't be Alicia's fault. She remembered Ark's words as he reached out his hand toward her. When the proposal came, no strings, just a promise, Alicia slammed it down and refused. Sure, her heart still carried bruised memories of her father and that fiancé, but Murray's lands were home and she was still their mistress. She realized she couldn't just toss her whole life away and still expect happiness. Mariah loved how Ark forgave her for dumping all the blame on him, then just let everything go, and man, those words of kindness hit her hard. But she just couldn't shrug it off. Then her mind sprinted straight to one wild thought: how amazing a wedding would be. Ark stormed up with a blade in hand as the victim screamed that he was a villain. Then the young man drove the knife into his arm and straight through his body. Staring at that mountain of corpses, Ark couldn't help but wonder what kind of hell his life was spiraling into. Staring up at the night sky, the young man snapped and screamed at the top of his lungs. He jolted awake in his bed, only to realize it had hit him again, a dream about the Absolute, and it instantly churned his stomach. Since death had become everyday noise, the boy slaughtered with zero guilt, until his past life memories kicked in and gave him a chance to change. Maybe it wasn't him at all, maybe it was this world's harsh rule of absolutes making it feel normal. Either way, the young man still couldn't accept it. After slaughtering all those people, he still couldn't shut his mind off, like the rage kept clawing at him nonstop. When Alicia called him a good man, her face lit up in his mind. Then Art followed with a grin and declared himself pure evil. Killing people changed nothing unless it was his own hands or his comrades', because even if the state gave the order, murder was still evil, and that's how the truth slammed home: the absolute was the real villain. Alicia felt a jolt of nerves as she headed back to the academy, her heart thundering in her chest. The moment she stepped inside, her friends lit up with pure joy and came running to greet her. They panicked for her, and right away they bombarded her with, "Are you okay? Tell us what's wrong." The girl thanked them for their concern, and just like that the room fell dead quiet, tense as a drawn bow, so Alicia whipped around to see what was happening. Ark and his crew barreled toward them, and when Mirai spotted him, her steps faltered. She couldn't decide if she should rush to greet him or fake like she hadn't seen him at all. Right as the tension hung there, an academy student cut in and asked what Absolute was feeling. She just shrugged and said, "She's been too loud." Christina Zen was the Duke's daughter and the kingdom's prime minister's pride. This time she swore she'd win. The girl taught the boy to treasure his friends, and he even offered her misto the moment she said she was bored. Alicia watched in shock as Christina casually called everyone by their first names, even Mirai too, like she never used to address her own servants that way, and Alicia couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that these two had bonded way too fast. The students were also buzzing about Zen and Ark's interactions, and Alicia couldn't stop herself from asking what it all meant, because they told her that, during her break and right through magic lessons, the two had been inseparable. New friends they'd just made slid right onto the same desk and faced the entrance exams side by side. From that moment on, they kept walking side by side, and everyone around them couldn't believe it. After chatting with Christina, Ark snapped his focus back to Mirai and demanded to know why she was here. Then, just like that, Mirai remembered his offer. She told him she believed the absolute wasn't special at all, just the same for everyone. The young man had no clue what Alicia was talking about, and his friends just stared, utterly baffled by her words. The student thanked the lady for hanging around, and she swore she'd grab every last note while she was gone and bring them back later, right on time to help Mariah out. Then Alicia spotted a girl up ahead. She stepped up to Princess Leone, apologized for keeping her waiting, then introduced herself, and the moment the student spoke her name, Princess Leone lit up, thrilled to finally meet her. Leone Suirok, Princess of the Suirok Kingdom, stormed into the academy as an exchange student, and lit up the moment she got to meet Mariah. The girl quizzed the princess about what she thought of their country, like she didn't already have it figured out by now. Leone thanked her for worrying, then Alicia told her to come straight to her if any trouble popped up. The princess told her new friend to use her first name, and that simple request instantly lit up the girl's whole face. For the rest of the day, she soaked up every second, laughing, chatting, and having the time of her life with the other students. With no art in the academy, it felt like paradise, and Mirai finally stopped feeling that tight, stressed-out pressure. Absolute was buried in his book when Maria burst into the room and told him a letter had arrived. He read it, snapped into action, and ordered his maid to get ready for work. In Lanana's kingdom, right in a town called Flower, the leftover pieces of the Surak kingdom's secret crew Julius have finally regrouped. The man snapped, furious that they couldn't just walk away, so they had to hit back fast and take revenge. In the kingdom of Cyrock, a brutal power struggle erupted between the organizations, and once Julius crushed the battle fast, he had no choice but to bolt for other countries. The subordinate nodded along with the boss, but his eyes still didn't get what they wanted him to do. Lanana turned out to be the good news, because everything else, not long ago there were several thousand of them, and now there are only 50 left. The leader hated having to admit it, but they were being pulled into the shadowy Heyomo. People said the noble Ark family was protecting them. The truth? The nobles wouldn't lift a finger. If the Jelius wanted to save their country, then they'd have to fight with their own strength. The boss groaned that the hired guide couldn't get them to the Ark family. Suddenly, one of his subordinates shouted, and he declared that a man had just arrived, saying he was here to introduce himself as part of the Ark family. The man started panicking about how many guards were coming, but then, boom, the guest rolled in alone, and the representative turned out to be none other than the Absolute himself. The organization's members slammed down to one knee in front of the young man, and he didn't even blink. he started explaining right away that he had business with them because they'd already been eyeing his family. Julius' boss leaned in and said his team was nursing a grudge against the Suirat kingdom, so they'd be perfect for him. Then it hit him, something out there was exactly the kind of thing that could hook Ark's attention. The young man was brought face to face with two twin sisters from a noble royal line, girls who'd fetch a fortune later. Absolute caught the organization in the middle of kidnapping, then the boss snapped back that House Ark had other products that could rake in profit. The young man listened to every proposal, then told them he was only focused on what the gang leader had said, like a weight finally slid off his chest. Then carnage exploded all around them in the next heartbeat. Ark slammed his judgment down, they were all unworthy. The hero swore he'd teach every last evildoer a brutal lesson himself, so Julius had no place in the Ark family. The brawl kept raging outside and the organization's boss demanded an answer pure and absolute. He reminded him, "We're all here because we chose to be allies." Then the boy snapped back that the Ark family had nothing to do with kidnapping anyone, and in his eyes it was just plain stupid, low, and dirty. He stared in disbelief, like there was no way that voice could have been his. He watched the young man and thought, must be nice, using powers to do whatever he wants, like every day is some kind of non-stop dream. The young man shot a glare at his boss and it rattled him to his core, then he couldn't stop asking himself, why? Ark's entire face twisted with pure contempt for the gang leader, and he couldn't stand it anymore. He pleaded with them to kill him. The man snapped at him not to look down, and the stench of blood, plus that sickening punch when the ball drove into him, made the boy feel like he wasn't just evil anymore, he was a real outcast, and he straight up loathed everything about war, especially what Gullius had done. Suddenly, that one guy yanked off his hood, and it was Mistu. He beamed and praised the gentleman for his incredible work. The man swore, just like he'd been told, that he'd unleashed the demon, and Mistu couldn't make sense of who the heck they were talking about. Ark told them it wasn't a normal intruder. It was an entity that slipped right through the Ark family's defenses and dragged Julius into the country. The hero spotted a negotiator sliding in from the side, and Mistu himself must have heard about him too. A negotiator isn't just a trader of deals, he dives into shadow orgs, then picks his missions purely for the biggest payday. After every fight, a secret skill kicked in, and suddenly he was a nightmare to track. That field training day, when they dumped a monster swarm into the arena, turned into a massacre, wiping out countless lives, and even the Ark family members didn't make it. The hero told Mistu to bring the girls along, promising he'd hand them to the king later. Then he slipped off his glove and gently stroked one of the twins' heads. Turns out they were aristocrats from the Suirat kingdom, and this whole situation felt seriously off. The guy grabbed the sword again and his friend blurted, confused, "Wait, what are you doing?" Then Ark leaned in and said he was about to fire off a few questions to the man from the secret organization. The negotiator just stood on the sidelines, staring in disbelief as Julius crumbled under the power of one lone person. His hopes weren't wrong, this Ark family was downright dangerous. He grabbed the paper and stared, cursing the idea of spending so much on something like this because no matter the price, walking away was still the better choice. Rage boiled in his veins because his job was supposed to be nothing but negotiations, yet he was still shoved into relocating everyone to another country. That negotiator ran with a notorious alias in the criminal underworld, chasing any job as long as the money hit, and when he saw Ark's insane abilities firsthand, his grin lit up, because this moment could be worth a fortune. The man slapped his mask back on and bolted to escape, but a girl suddenly materialized in front of him and slammed his path shut. It was a spirit, and a brutally powerful one at that. The boy demanded to know why she'd shown up, and when Ark stepped in, he couldn't believe it. The negotiator somehow knew spirits were real. He said the leader of one of those gangs was also a spirit summoner, and the hero even started to wonder if they'd crossed paths before. The masked man snapped into alarm and stumbled a step back from the newcomer, and Ark shot a quick intro, because this was their very first meeting. He jabbed a finger at the negotiator, because it was him who dragged the Julius crew to that spot, and now the masked man had the nerve to harass him, so the young man's irritation flared hot. The masked man staggered as an invisible grip crushed his chest, stealing every breath and every word, while the absolute raged at being brushed off, and the young man surged with one goal, to scare the stranger then end him. The negotiator sensed the storm closing in, because if this kept going they'd crush him for good. He forced himself to breathe through the panic, then lunged for freedom right as the next second hit. The man shouted for a teleport. But somehow nothing happened, and the guy's heart sank as he realized his skill didn't even activate. He kept hammering the call, but Ark's patience snapped. He cursed the guy, and right then the mask cracked. Pure rage was oozing out of the Absolute like it was unstoppable, because the negotiator crossed the line and kept ignoring him. Half the mask finally crumbled away and the boy's terrified face stared out in shock. Then his mind screamed, how did the hero pull that off? Ark leaned in and said, I've got an item that can suppress skills. Linana forged a special tech marvel at the peak of her genius, and the world only built it after an assassination struck a legendary hero from the past. Then the Absolute got it by striking a deal with the king. For him, nothing mattered more than getting things done fast and right. He wasn't about to sit on the sidelines like nothing was happening, and he sure wasn't going to let the negotiator slip away. Ark had a whole storm of questions he desperately wanted to fire at that boy. That's when the masked man's plan finally clicked. He wanted to unleash a whole swarm of demons during Lanana Academy's field training. The hero shot his hand onto the man's shoulder, and the negotiator jolted like electricity had just ripped through his bones. Panic started to creep into the boy's chest. This kind of intel was only supposed to be known by the people in the know, and Ark clearly had been briefed. And every name on that list stayed locked away too, because to uncover what they really wanted, they had to dig through a mountain of info sources. The young man finally clocked it. He'd totally misread how strong his enemy was, and that meant certain doom, so he burned through his last sliver of hope and then bolted for his life. All he could think about was one terrifying truth: he couldn't die. Then he spun around and there it was, the danger charging straight at him at full speed. He couldn't shake the feeling his pursuer was playing with him, and right when hope surged, his escape got slammed shut by a cliff. Behind him, the hero's ominous voice rang out, screaming to end it all, and the negotiator realized the stakes were absolutely too high to walk away. Right then, bam, he got kicked straight in the stomach. It slammed the life right out of him. The young man stared down his fallen enemy, disgust blazing in his eyes because he'd just learned you can't buy life with money. Down in Ark's basement, the ex-negotiator was strapped to a chair with a bag yanked over his head, and Ark fought to wake him up, but the man just refused to budge, stubborn as stone. The hero never guessed his guest could keep going that long, but even that kind of endurance hit a wall. Absolute pushed the negotiator back and slammed forward, then jabbed him hard and demanded to know who the client really was. The guy cracked fast and St. Eliza was revealed in a blink, but the hero just couldn't wrap his head around it. He knew that a 15-year-old girl couldn't pull off a plan like that by herself. This had to be bigger, with other people plotting it and others executing it. Inside the church, St. Eliza announced everything was running perfectly. Then she confirmed the negotiator's brainwashing on the monsters was finished. Everything played out exactly like she planned, and the cardinal nodded in full agreement. Namuria didn't just like teamwork, she demanded cooperation, pushing everyone to combine forces and crush the Ark family. Michael Lanana didn't feel the need for gratitude at all, because they were friends, and the fact that they could count on him already left him genuinely happy. Then he cornered the saint and demanded to know if the contract was truly solid, or if anything was wrong with it. The girl nodded yes, right on the spot. The second the operation wrapped up, she swore to the former prince she'd back him all the way as they fought to reclaim the throne. The crew wanted to cram in as much time in Ark as they could because who knew how long it would last, and while they did, the hero was already wrestling with one terrifying question: who was behind all this? After Hyro snapped and went out of control, Class A started whispering like something's about to explode, while the saint stood her ground, insisting she had nothing to answer for. Ark insisted that she'd use the instigation skill on the Baron on purpose, just to light a fire under his temper, while Eliza brushed it off, calling the whole accusation awful. She insisted that even if she were behind it, the young man still wouldn't have a shred of proof. Magic could have uncovered proof, but the hero trusted her rare skill and knew there was nothing anyone else could do with it. The saint's power of incitement hit the human mind and jerked everyone into action, but the truth of what couldn't be seen stayed impossible to prove. Ark's confidence flattered her like he could somehow see her powers, and she couldn't help but wonder what he'd do when there was zero proof. They had no choice but to cave in and fall back to her, but she just made herself an enemy, so sooner or later she'd make him pay. The boy replayed the hero's murder in his head, the kind he'd seen with his own eyes, and then a cold, unmistakable malice hit him from the saint's direction. It was like the church had its hands in the whole thing. Back in the original, the saint was a sweet church girl, way too naive about the real world, though you can't help wondering if she was secretly hiding something bigger because she's got the acting chops to pull it off. The professor finally let the students slip into their seats, and right on cue, Ark heard about the field exercise and his ears perked up. Next week, every first year would get split into groups and dumped into the southern forest of the kingdom to hunt monsters with only 3 days on the clock. Your progress is measured by how high your rank climbs and how many monster trophies you bag. This was basically a survival practical. Your team needed someone who could smash through every obstacle, and the hero was stunned that they were actually allowed to hunt dangerous monsters. Tota warned that even the weakest monsters could become deadly if enough of them swarmed together. Then the man wished every student well, while the hero frowned hard because time was slipping away and he had to move now. As Absolute strode down the hallway, a wild thought hit him hard. Maybe the church wasn't hunting the art at all, but him, or even the whole twisted arc. Then he shrugged it off. Because in the original, Christina was already dead, so the details were doomed to stay blurry. Val seethed at the newcomer, so much so that she'd even trust him to clean. She told him to grind hard and he'd finally get results. The coordinator got it all but told the maid to stop saying nasty stuff. He was still way too young for that kind of talk. The maid clocked the gentleman right away and greeted him with pure joy, then leaned in and told him the newcomer was turning out to be incredibly useful. She slipped back and forth between the mansion and the academy, and somehow she still kept up with every task. The hero gently stroked her head, then slid his hand onto the young man's back and urged him to get ready for the coming exam. Students showed up at the agreed spot, and the moment they did, Ark's frown deepened again. Maria clocked the gentleman's gloomy face, but he quickly told her to ignore it. Then they herded everyone into groups and the instructors laid out the forest routes in advance. No surprises, no mess, so each squad could stick to its exact path. Michael commanded the royal faction, Eliza led the church faction, Alicia rallied the girls faction, Christina teamed up with the aristocratic faction, and the House of Ark faction rolled in with Lady Leone. The girl grabbed her teacher's attention and demanded an explanation for why she'd been thrown into the group with the Absolute. Teach snapped that if anything happened to the Duke's daughter, the whole kingdom would go down with it, so they agreed to run the test under the Archhouse's protection. They tapped the 2 mightiest royal faction disciples and told them to team up for this group. They did it all to shield Lady Leone, and the moment the girl understood the plan, she swallowed her doubts and chose not to fight it. That showdown with the monsters and the chat with the saint was already setting off alarms for something wild. In the original story, Lady Leonese was meant to join the hero's party, but somehow she got swept into far more trustworthy company. Absolute strode up to introduce himself, and with Lady Cruella at her side, she couldn't stop smiling. Being grouped with the Duke's daughter felt like pure luck. The others jumped in too. Mistu backed Cruella's inspiration hard, throwing himself behind her and helping out in every way he could. The girl shooed her friends off to do something instead of just hanging around, and Leone's laugh burst out like she couldn't believe it, because this new group felt downright charming. Leonie Rogg shot back the same feelings. She wasn't great at magic, but she was deadly with a sword, and she kept cheering everyone on to give it their best shot. Absolute snapped at the lady because he feared she'd be distracted, but he cut right through it and swore he was on her side. He demanded she follow every instruction and never, ever be left alone, because he wanted to station guards around her so that if trouble struck, they'd step in and protect her. Leone tossed out a single comment, then called it out. Even though it was his group, protocol had already slapped a maid onto it. She was freaking out, wondering if something was seriously wrong, but the guy shot back with a steady reassurance. Even so, he knew they'd crush that exam, because they had the fighting power to do it. Christina walked up to Ark and asked how he was doing, then pushed hard. Was he really thinking of going up against her group? Ark didn't seem thrilled about her showing up, but she kept grilling him. Are you going to compete for how many monsters you kill? He finally snapped back that he'd do it only if he felt like it. She faked being disappointed, then snapped that if he kept talking like that, she'd take offense, and boy, baiting and insulting was exactly the hero's game. Then she shifted her focus to Mistu too, because this fight wasn't just theirs, it was his. He sat there watching them snap at each other, already fearing that this might be the last time he ever talked to Christina. Her magic was brutally powerful, but I still can't wrap my head around why she died in the original story, because if the absolute lands on her team, they're walking straight into danger. He snapped out of his thoughts because this wasn't just a fight, it was justice, and the only thing that mattered was crushing the monsters the church had unleashed. If the hero didn't step in, the monsters would have torn through his subordinates, yet even this young man couldn't rescue everyone. The guy called Christina and blurted out that everything had gone horribly wrong. The girl asked what could have happened and even teased him about asking for money, but Ark snapped that it would take forever to explain and tossed every question to Mistu, though his friend was definitely not thrilled about getting stuck with it. She snapped back to herself, realized she'd spilled too much and hurriedly apologized. Mistu snapped at her to shut up, like he was the one who'd left her behind. The young man spotted Mr. Ark and bolted over, breathing hard as the hero shot him. "You okay?" Chris nodded and said yes, then the hero leaned in and asked which road their crew would take. He fired back, "Road E." That absolute was sitting on D, not too far away, close enough to make you wonder if someone rounded them up on purpose, dragged them into the forest, and aimed to wipe out the whole arch faction, and he refused to let his guard drop for even a second. Mistu and Cruella had already thrown themselves into a brutal brawl with the goblins, and the boy shot a warning to Lady to stay on her guard. The girl got it the moment it hit her, then snapped her aim and hurled an ice spear straight in. She battled the monsters in front of her, but then they snapped around and started clawing at her back too. Oriana held her ground just long enough to cut down the goblins the second she came to a stop, and Mistu immediately shrieked about fresh monsters crawling in. Leon handled the enemies like a pro. Sure, they hadn't pushed deep yet, but the monsters were already swarming in huge numbers. Ark hung back while Mistu and the rest begged him to stay nearby so they could farm experience, but the pressure from his comrades bore down on him like they were all daring him to jump in and fight. The hero snapped, asking if they were exhausted, and swore he'd jump in the moment fresh enemies showed up. Cruella tried to talk him out of it, claiming they were weak and that they could handle the threat themselves. That's why she begged the Absolute to give them a chance to prove what they're made of, and Mistu had her back the whole way. Ariana shrugged it off like it was nothing, then the lady offered them a drink of her own water. The hero knit his brows and clasped his hands tight in front of him, and right away his comrades started to panic all over again. Then the Duke's daughter stepped in and offered him water. The friends hurriedly set up a cozy little picnic for a quick break. Leona couldn't help it, she took a sip and the water hit like pure, refreshing magic, like nature itself bottled that taste just for her. Then she leaned in and asked the girl what kind of water it was, and Cruella snapped back, "It's lady water." The noble woman whipped up that liquid with water magic, no copy, all her own work, and Ark knew his buddy was just messing around, but it still hit the princess like a punch. She blinked in shock, but the moment she replayed it in her head, it totally made sense, and the whole group cracked up at her reaction. Suddenly Ark sensed the spirit's presence, and his eyes snapped wide open. A burst of light ripped upward. That was Chris's magic. Absolute warned Mistu he'd be gone for 15 minutes, ordered him to reinforce the barrier, and then Absolute sprinted deeper into the forest. The boy caught it instantly. The spot his master was storming toward was packed with a whole higher level of magic. Something's definitely going on there. This place feels loaded with tension, and the young man quickly orders Orion to refill the firewood and water, while Maria keeps her eyes on the whole area around them. What scared him most was that Ark charged forward without even hesitating, like he already knew what happened before it ever came. Leon waved for Browse, calling him in to talk about something urgent. The young man leaned in and asked how he could help, and she told him it all came down to Mr. Ark. Then she pushed, "So, what do you think of him?"